Go live. And we're live. That's it. We're here. Welcome, welcome. We're signing on early. Just a few minutes. Let us gather our places. Everybody get ready. Welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm Joe Sasto. Joining us as always, the beautiful Bella.
Hi.
How's everyone doing today?
Hello.
I'm excited for another Sunday filled with pasta. That's what Sundays are for. They're for cooking. I mean, you could say Sundays are for pasta. I mean, cooking, pasta, they're pretty interchangeable. I think Sundays are a great day. You know, we're getting ready to start the week, but you want to start strong. Start the week off right. What better way to do that than cooking together, right? Where's everyone from today? I know there are people, I saw some people signing up from all over the world for this round, which is, you know, incredibly humbling for me that people from all over the world want to hang out and make pasta, learn how to make pasta. Today we're diving into the world of tortellini, one of my favorite shapes. You know, I don't want to say my favorite shape because that could be misleading. My favorite shape changes depending on the day. It's never the same. I don't have children. But I imagine it's that same feeling when you ask a parent which one of their children are their favorite. It depends on the day.
No,
it's always going to change.
Children.
Oh, yeah, right. All of their children are their favorites. But we all know every parent has a favorite child. Come on. I won't know until I have kids. But I imagine every parent has a favorite child.
No, that's not true, Chef Joe. Every single child is the favorite.
I guess we'll see. We shall see one day. I can't speak to
Hi
that.
from
But
Washington, D.C., Sydney.
Guatemala, Calgary, Canada.
Yay.
Checking in from Decatur, Georgia. Shout out to Georgia. Coming through in the clutch in January.
Yes, Toronto, Red Bluff. Hi, everyone.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Welcome in. We're here early as always.
Yeah, we're here early. Don't worry, nobody's late. Find your seats. Make yourselves comfortable.
Yes.
You got some time.
Pour yourself a nice glass of wine because it's Sunday.
It's Sunday. You could do that. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. There are no rules.
Whoever made the rule about it being 5 o'clock?
Well, because they say the work day ends at 5 and you can't start drinking until you're done with work.
Well, that's not true for everyone.
That's just where the phrase came from.
Like you and I, we work 24/7.
I know. There are these phrases that you can't control. Someone came up with them.
Well,
and
yes. They're just saying.
They don't apply.
Maryland is here. Oregon.
Oregon. Can you tell me, is it Oregon or Oregon?
I say Oregon.
I say Oregon.
I like Oregon because it sounds like more Lord of the Ringsy.
It sounds very exotic.
Like Oregon.
The land of Oregon, far to the north. But I don't know.
I
say Oregon. That state up there. It's north.
We love Oregon. Florida, freezing Maine. Oh, it's cold there?
It's cold in Maine.
I
imagine it's cold in Maine. It's on the East Coast.
Really
it's wintertime.
Yes, I remember Maine in the winter. It was quite cold.
Maine in the winter.
Yes.
Welcome, everybody just joining us. You're here early. We are here early. It's okay. Find your seats. I know everyone needs to find room. There are parking spots. The lot was full. Everybody had to park in the auxiliary lot today. So everybody's slowly finding their way over here. You're in the right place. Come on in. Right this way. I saved some seats over there for you. Yes, you just joining us. No, not you. There. Yes, I saved those seats for you here. Come on. Right this way. You're in the right spot.
Oh boy. Tampa, Tallahassee, Toronto, Riverside, Hayward, and Oregon said Oregon. Okay.
What?
Oregon.
So was I right or were you right?
I don't know. I say Oregon.
Oregon.
Miami, New York.
Welcome.
Love
It's 2
it.
p.m. right now. We usually give it 1 or 2 more minutes.
Yeah.
As soon as Bella's alarm goes off by accident, she forgets to turn it off.
That's not true. I want everyone to realize that we're starting.
And we're starting,
Like
but we're not there yet.
It's like the starting bell.
The starting clock.
Yes, absolutely. Who's excited to make some tortellini?
I don't know if you can tell I'm very excited. This is my very excited face. Let's go. Pump it up.
My excited face. You can't see it, but my face is very excited.
I'm so excited. I get excited anytime I get to make pasta and hang out with people because this is my social interaction for the time being. You know, like I don't get to actually teach people in person anymore. There's the alarm. All right, we are just about ready to begin. All right, welcome everyone joining us. You're in the right spot. It's 2 o'clock. We are kicking off our tortellini workshop today from the, well, I can't say bright and sunny California today because it's a little gloomy and rainy outside, but I personally love that. I know Bella loves that too.
I love gloomy.
Speaking of Bella, we have Bella on the chat room today. So all throughout this lesson, it's interactive. This is live. This is actually happening. We're cooking start to finish. Anything can happen. We have no idea, literally anything, but hopefully nothing crazy because that would ruin our time together. But anything can happen. Ask questions throughout. Drop them into the chat room because you can't obviously unmute yourself. This is not a two-way stream. It's just one way. It's me coming to you. So thank you for having me into your homes. And like I said, questions, drop them in the chat. Bella's going to read them to me and I'll be happy to answer them. That being said, if this is your first time, try to keep your questions to what we're actually working on. That keeps the flow of the class going nice and smoothly, and we're not jumping around, bouncing all over the place, and someone's asking questions about dessert while we're still making the appetizer.
Well, we're not
making dessert or an appetizer today.
You. Sorry.
I know, that was a trick to see if everyone was paying attention, right? Everyone's paying attention.
But you know
There's no desserts today, but you know what I mean, right? So, thank you for being here. But without further ado, was I missing anything else? Oh, I almost forgot.
What?
Listen, please remember to take photos. Let's take photos. Let's document this day together. They say, I don't know who they are, but they say that if you don't take pictures of your food before you eat it, it's not going to taste as good. So take some photos. Tag me on Instagram at chef.joe.sasto. I love seeing what everyone does. I love reposting it. And it just kind of like spreads that positivity throughout the world. Good vibes.
Yeah, we love
good vibes, good puns.
Me.
Bad dad jokes. That's what you're going to get here all this afternoon.
Cat dad
Are you ready
jokes.
for it? Yeah, cat dad. Not a real dad yet. But a cat dad, plant dad. That's close.
Yeah.
It's close.
Yeah.
All right. So, getting started. Before we dive into the filling, I always like to start with the dough. Let's talk about the dough for a moment. Everyone, if you're cooking along, should have your dough made in advance. I have mine made in advance. It's hanging out down here under the table, tempering at room temperature. Now I know I started this new thing where I send out a couple videos of me making the dough so you get to do it in advance, we get to do it along. But I always like to take a moment and stop and ask and see if anyone had any questions, any issues with their dough as it came together. You know, we can spend a moment, we can spend way more than a moment actually. I could probably spend hours just talking about dough and flour and wheat and gluten. But unless that's what you guys really want to spend this entire time talking about, I want to keep it very surface level. So, you know, this dough may be a little different if you've taken another class of mine that uses all egg yolks. Let's touch on that. So thinking about doughs, I have a few different doughs that I use. Usually, depending on how I want that final pasta texture to be, what the final shape is that I want to use, and occasionally how much excess egg whites that I want around. Sometimes I don't mind having extra egg whites. I have a use for them. I'll make an all egg yolk dough, super rich, very easy to work with, and super bright and vibrant yellow in color. But sometimes I want a whole egg dough. And so I balance that out with some egg yolks. And thinking about the properties of egg yolks and whole eggs will kind of help you understand on what each are bringing to the party. So egg yolks are what? Mostly fat. So with fat, we're not adding any additional water necessarily. We're not adding that much extra protein. We're just adding fat. Fat inhibits gluten development. It makes things smoother. It makes them a little less elastic, but it does give this beautiful shine, this beautiful texture. It doesn't souffle or really puff as much when it cooks, so it leaves the dough with a very unique and desirable quality. Whole eggs now have whites. They have the yolks as well, but the whites are really what you're adding. What are in egg whites? They're mostly protein and they're mostly water. So those two things mixed with flour are going to enhance your gluten development. They're going to combat the fat and make gluten happen more easily. There's no fat stopping that gluten network from coming together. And the protein's actually going to double up or triple up with the protein that you already have in your flour, making for a very elastic and stretchy dough. Egg whites actually souffle when they cook. If you think about souffles or omelets or something like that, they puff a little bit. So keep that in mind when you're rolling a whole egg dough. It's going to puff slightly when it cooks. It's going to have a different texture. It's going to be a little more toothy. It's going to have more of a mouthfeel, which isn't necessarily all a bad thing. Just something to consider when you're trying to decide, do I want an all egg yolk dough? Do I want a dough with half and half? Do I want one with all whole eggs? There are reasons why you'd want to do each, and thinking about the shape, thinking about the filling, thinking about the final dish and how it all comes together and eats in your mouth, in your belly, and in your palate, we're all going to help you make those decisions. So questions.
Yes. Well, one of them said a little hard and dry, and then how do you decide whether to use 3 or 4 egg yolks, which is kind of what you just touched on.
So two questions to unpack there. If it's a little hard and dry, we need to add a couple spritzes of water. Depending on how dry, you may need to add an extra yolk. That's where the 3 to 4 comes in. And that helps bring it together. Watching that video, you get to see inside of the stand mixer, and whether you're doing it by hand or the stand mixer, both versions kind of show the dough come together. And if you don't see your dough coming together in that timeline, like the 5-minute mark, the 8-minute mark, really by 10 minutes, you should have a dough that you're kneading very well. If it's still very dry and very crumbly, you need more moisture in there. And a lot of that has to do with, the brand of flour, the size of your eggs, where your eggs are from. Not all eggs are created equal. Some chickens get a better diet, and so their eggs are better. They have fattier yolks. They have more protein-ridden whites. Or a chicken that, wasn't maybe taken care of so well, their yolks might not have as much water, or they might just kind of be filled up with excess stuff you don't want in your pasta dough. So think about those things when you're choosing your ingredients. It all makes a very big difference, especially in something like pasta dough that only has 2 or 3 ingredients. So why not do your best to source out the best version of those that you have available to you.
A couple more questions about the dough. I used 4 and it didn't look crumbly like yours. It came together fast.
So that's a great thing.
That's great.
That sounds
Perfect.
good. You did it good.
Yeah.
Good job.
Good job. And then I had to do the same thing about us misting quite a bit. I hope it came together well. Can you add another yolk partway through the mixing of the dough?
We can stop there. Yes. That's what I was talking about, the 5 or 8 minute mark. So if you see in the videos, in the mixer especially, it's easier to add in extra stuff partway through. If you hit that 5 minute mark and it's really not coming together, it's still very crumbly and sandy and dry looking, and you reach your hand in there, you squeeze it, you try to help it come together, and you don't see that it is coming together, yes, absolutely. Add another yolk. I avoid trying to add another whole egg because a whole egg is a lot of moisture. Like, don't take for granted how much moisture a whole egg will add to your mix. And then often you'll end up with something too sticky that then is going to stick to your wrap when you go set it to rest. It's going to stick to your bowl. Then you have to add a little more flour. And then you're kind of playing this terrible, frightening game of a little flour, a little water, a little flour, a little water. And then things just get out of hand. And you don't want to be in that situation. So Mister works really well. Adding an extra yolk if needed helps. And then something else that definitely helps is having ingredients at room temperature. I realize that I don't know if I always say that, but it's kind of second nature to me, but I know not everybody is cooking all the time. So having ingredients at room temperature make a big difference when you're making any sort of dough. And you don't want ice cold eggs right from the fridge. The reason being is they're going to be ice cold. And so they're going to stress out the dough. They're not going to incorporate as easily. And you're going to have a much harder time kneading versus having room temperature eggs. And a quick fix for that is just putting them in a bowl, fill it up with like warm tap water and letting them sit for 5 minutes. It'll take the chill off of it. You can do that first thing while you get your rest of your ingredients and components together, your flour, your salt, whatever it is you need. Your mixer, set everything up. By then your eggs will be room temperature and you're ready to go.
Can you provide the recipe/ratio one more time? I sent the Tortellini website, and then do you usually weigh the ingredients or measure them?
So, good question. If I'm making a very large batch, or I'm doing something that I want to be super consistent, like if I'm in the restaurant or I'm cooking a dinner, or I want them to all be the same, and I'm making like multiple batches of dough, I will weigh it. And I'll even weigh the eggs. I'll break it down into grams, and I won't do 3 to 4. I'll be like, exactly, I need 219 grams of egg yolks for this recipe. And that way, everything's consistent across the board. If I'm just cooking like this, or at home, or I'm just like shooting a video for Instagram, or cooking for my friends and family, or I'm gonna go drop something off socially distanced, I won't weigh it. I'll go through 2 to 4, I'll eyeball it. I'll always weigh my flour. I never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, use a cup measurement for my flour. So if you're doing that already, get yourself a kitchen scale. I think they're like $10 now. They're super easy to find.
They're really a great investment
they're
as well.
An incredible investment. Whether you're baking, making bread, pasta, if you find yourself in the kitchen more than one day a week, I think it's worth that investment to get yourself a kitchen scale. It makes all the difference. I was actually going to do a video just, one day to show people that if you take a scoop out of flour 3 different times and try to measure a cup, you're going to have 3 totally different weights. And that's just going to drastically change everything when you're trying to be consistent. So something to consider if you're still using a cup measurement. Did I hit the question there? I kind of got sidetracked. Yeah. Sorry.
And
I like to talk. I apologize.
There's a couple of other questions.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Flour brand preferences.
So flour brand preferences, you have a couple choices. Fresh is best. I like to think of wheat like a vegetable. You wouldn't use old tomatoes to make tomato soup. You wouldn't use old carrots to make carrot soup. Pasta only has, 2 or 3 ingredients, so fresh flour is best. Wheat is a vegetable. As it sits on the shelf, it changes. It ages. And what happens during that aging process is it absorbs ambient flavors, ambient moisture from the air, and it changes over the course of that time. And so it becomes inconsistent. You lose the true flavor of the flour, and wheat has flavor. So if I really want the wheat to be the star of the show, I'll use freshly ground, 00, super fine. Wheats, some of my favorite freshly ground wheats. Central Milling Company does a really great job. Hayden Flour Mills in Arizona does a really great job. Gristentol in LA does a really great job. That's not all California either, so good. We got a couple. And then I know K2, if you're on the East Coast, those are all West Coast brands. K2 Milling on the East Coast does a really great job. I haven't used it, but I know friends that do and they like it, so I'll vouch for them. And then if you're not going freshly ground, if you want commodity, easy to find, pasta flour, Caputo's is one of my favorite brands. They make a lot of different versions of Caputo 00 flour, so that's something to pay attention to. We can talk about that for a second because it's a good point to mention. Caputo has 00. 00 only refers to how finely ground something is. It does not have anything to do with the protein content or a potential blend of wheats in that bag of flour. Caputo has a lot of different versions. They have a red bag, a blue bag, a yellow bag, a brown bag, all labeled 00, all with different amounts of protein, different qualities of the wheat involved, which some are better for pizza, some are better for pasta, some may be better for gnocchi, some may be better for baked goods, all ground to the same fineness, but not the same amount of protein, which is going to, in turn, have an effect on the gluten content that you're working with. So I prefer the brown bag. It says pasta and gnocchi flour, 00, Caputo's. That's like my all-purpose 00 flour. Not to get confused with all-purpose flour, but my all-purpose 00 flour is brown bag Caputo's.
Yes, and then great segue to the next question. Can you sub AP flour for 00 in a 1-to-1 ratio?
I'm going to say no. Because AP flour does not usually, depending on the brand, have the same amount of protein content that most 00 pasta flours have. They're not ground to the same fineness, so you're going to have a very different dough than if you use 00. There's not a ratio I could prescribe to you. If you're trying to do it, you're going to have to eyeball it. You could definitely do it. It's possible. It works. You just kind of have to have a feel for what it should look like. And slowly add your liquid or slowly add your eggs until it comes together to that right consistency, rather than just blindly following a recipe and going 1 for 1. It's the same, because it's not.
Doesn't the humidity of the environment make a little difference with the moisture of the dough?
1,000%, yes. Yes. There's not much more to say about it other than yes, the flour makes a difference, the eggs makes a difference. The environment you're making it makes a difference. I was doing a dinner, like 2 years ago now, last year. Oh, it was last year. It was February last year, so I could say last year. I was doing a dinner. It was in like a desert climate, and I was so used to working somewhere closer to the ocean where the humidity is totally different, and all of my dough recipes changed. I showed up, I was cooking in the kitchen, and I had to kind of rework everything I was doing because it was so dry and arid, and everything needed so much more egg or so much more water than what I was used to. And that just, goes to show how drastic the environment has an effect on it. And even if you're in a humid environment, it changes day to day. Here in San Francisco, it's very humid, but it's not the same level of humidity, and it's not the same type of humidity as if you're in Florida or New York. They're all very different styles and types of humidity. So all that does make a difference, and that just kind of goes to show, or another example, on why you can't just read a recipe and follow it like it's written in stone and it's the only way to do it. You really have to be a cook. You got to use your senses. You got to drive that car. You can't just blindly follow a map that tells you how to get somewhere. You got to know. Don't turn down that one-way street. Maybe we avoid that way because there's traffic. Hey, this looks a little dry. We need a little more water. And that's where just watching videos, watching what I do, taking a look at those things that I sent out prior to this will help you understand what you're doing. And you know what? I'm pretty easy to get a hold of on Instagram. If you've done this, we talk about the talking emojis. Shoot me a DM the next time you're making dough if you're unsure. For the most part, Bella or I get back to people pretty quickly, especially if they're a student of ours. And so I'm more than happy to kind of talk you through the process if you're unsure, because that's what I'm here for. You're here supporting me. I want to support you.
Is it okay to make this dough in a food processor, or will that overwork it? I used the KitchenAid mixer today, but I've used a food processor in the past. Will this work too?
I've never used a food processor to make dough. Not to say you can't. It's just something I've never done. I don't know. To me, it just doesn't make sense because you're chopping up the flour, and so you're essentially at some point grinding part of that flour. And you're not grinding it consistently because some of it's not getting ground, some of it is. It's just like if you put flour or oats in a food processor and turn it on, it's going to become finer. It just doesn't not do anything. There are blades in there. So I've never done it in a food processor. That's not to say you can't. It's not my preferred method. I'd rather mix it by hand if I don't have a stand mixer. But that's not to say, like I know, a friend of mine, Dave, does all of his doughs in a food processor. Starts them in there, finishes it by hand, which is totally an option.
Do you think adding good olive oil to, if more moisture is needed, is okay instead of adding another egg yolk?
So great question. I don't add olive oil to my dough unless I want that olive oil flavor. And so that kind of goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning with like, what does each ingredient bring to the party? Eggs bring flavor, but the yolks bring fat. What does olive oil bring? It's bringing flavor and fat. So you could sub them out for one another if you wanted to. I don't like to. Pasta dough to me is like pure. You want it to taste like the egg. You want it to taste like the wheat. Sometimes you want it to taste like that additive, the food powder or vegetable powder that you're using. But I never want it to taste like olive oil. That's not like, a characteristic of pasta dough that I'm going for. Sometimes less ingredients in a recipe or more. So I won't, but you can use olive oil to help get that little extra bit of fat you need to bring it together. And that's why you see olive oil in some recipes, because they rather use oil, they rather add an extra ingredient, they want the flavor, they don't want to use another egg. And that's totally on the chef and the person making it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not my preferred style or method at all.
Your plans are beautiful. Are they real? Yes.
Yes, everything is real.
What is your favorite pasta making tip for the home cooks ready to take their pasta to the next / professional-esque level?
That's a lot to get into. Okay, I'll break it down into 2 or 3 parts. Room temperature, ingredients. Having room temperature to warm eggs makes a big difference. Kneading your dough longer than you think you need to, and taking a break partway through that kneading process. You don't need to knead start to finish. It's not something that needs to go, and if you stop, it's game over. You can knead for 10 minutes, put a lid over it, put a bowl on top of it, wrap it up, set it on your counter, go walk away, have a glass of water, hang out with the cats, come back 5 minutes later, and then finish kneading. And 1, it's easier to knead. 2, your dough is relaxed partially. And 3, you end up with then various stages of that gluten development, and it just becomes a much easier thing to work with. So especially if it's your first time kneading and you're not comfortable kneading dough all the way through, because 1, it's hard, and maybe you don't have the right rhythm or wrist intensity to do it, taking that little break is okay and encouraged.
I think that's great. And last question, what protein content is ideal?
Protein content for me, I like 13%. Is kind of a great number. Most all-purpose flours are like 12%. Some 00 flours go down to 11%, which is still okay. Anything kind of in that, I would say 11 to 13 is good. Once you get up to 14, you're kind of talking bread flour, which is still okay and would be great if you're using an all-yolk dough. But if you're using a whole egg dough and flour with like 14% protein, you're going to have a very, I don't want to say hard, toothsome dough that you end up with.
We're good to go.
That's it.
Let's go.
High five to everyone out there for all those questions, first of all. Those were all really good questions.
Great Q&A.
Great Q&A session there. And I'm sorry if I just keep talking because I really like talking and telling people all of these, opinions and beliefs and what I've learned. And so I like to teach. So you're sitting there and you're like, well, God, when are we getting to pasta making? Now, all right? I'm sorry if that was too long for you, but you know what? It wasn't too long for some other people, and we're all here together. So let's do it, shall we?
Yes.
All right, first things first, let's make our filling. Pasta dough aside, we've got that out of the way.
Yes.
Q&A for that portion is done. We're going to make our filling. Tortellini filling is a very, very classic filling. When you go to Bologna, there's not a lot of variation in tortellini filling. It normally consists of pork. That is the king of that region, that area, that city. Pork is king. They have a very, very prized culture of pork, of raising pigs, of showcasing the pig and celebrating it. So it's a variety of different pork products. And the various recipes that I gave you is a great base starting point. But some of those ingredients are hard to find. Not everybody has access to prosciutto. Not everybody can find mortadella. That's all right. What you can do is just sub them out. That's why I like, sliced country ham works really well. You can use pancetta. You can even use bacon if you want. Give it a little bit of a smoky flavor. But the idea you want to kind of think about is it should be pork, and it should be a combination of cured pork and raw pork. So like a pork salami type product and a fresh pork type product, whether that's ground pork, pork shoulder, pork belly. You can even go with pork loin if you want something a little leaner without all that extra fat, and that's all okay. So that's really kind of the building blocks of what we're working with the filling. The other ingredients always has parm, sometimes has egg, usually a little nutmeg to kind of play off those mortadella spices, and then some black or white pepper.
Before you begin,
yes, question.
One more question. In prep for today's class, my dough wouldn't come on the backside when I was kneading. I kept spritzing with water, but it would just sort of layer underneath. Any tips? What I'm thinking is it was either too dry and you could have used a little more water, which maybe not without seeing it. The other thing is that you could have worked the gluten so quickly and so fast that it got stressed out and it was kind of tearing and stretching on itself, and the backside was kind of ripping. You almost were like forming a hole in the middle, which I've seen happen, which then highly benefits from just leaving it alone. 5 minutes. Cover it, let it hang out, and come back to it. It's going to have a chance to have absorbed the water. The flour sometimes takes time to absorb water or absorb the eggs, and so once it's fully hydrated, it becomes much easier to knead. Once you kind of let that first intense strength building of the gluten kind of relax, it becomes easier to knead and come together. Even just wrapping it up and putting it aside, even if you don't come back to it and finish kneading, a couple of hours of sitting on the counter develops gluten, just doing nothing. That's what happens. It's called autolysis. It's like a self-digestion of flour and water, and so that develops gluten as well. So, leaving it on its own is usually the best cure for when your dough is really tight and just kind of ripping or tearing on you. Cool? Filling. Back to the filling. A lot of different ways to do this. Not everyone has a meat grinder. That's my preferred method. Whether it's on the KitchenAid attachment, which works really well, or in a food processor, which is an alternative. You can put all the meat in, pulse it till it's like ground and pasty. But what I want to show today is how to make the filling if you don't have either of those. And to show it is possible to make a really nice tortellini filling without any sort of equipment. So that's the version I'm going to demonstrate. If you do have a meat grinder or you do have a food processor, you could grind everything in there and then you'll just kind of jump in with us as soon as everything goes in the bowl and we'll mix it all together. But I do like showing that you can get the same product just with a bunch of sliced meats. From the grocery store, we have our prosciutto, some mortadella, our ham, and that's kind of like going to give us a variety of flavors, a little bit of creaminess and texture, nice emulsification, extra bit of saltiness and umami. All this can come together. We're just going to take all of our meat. We can stack it up nicely here on our cutting board. You can even roll it up too. That would work. And like I said, if you need to or you want to use your KitchenAid attachment or a meat grinder, that's great. I have one. I love using it. But like I said, not everyone does, and I want this to be accessible. I want to show that you can do this. And what you're going to do, you're going to use a cutting board, you're going to use your knife, and we're just going to go to town on this. We're going to finely chop first as well as we can all the way across. I'll start with my mortadella. I bought pancetta instead of prosciutto. Whoops. So will that be a problem?
Like I said, not a problem at all. You can use whatever meats you have available to you. There's no like right or wrong answer. I just like for tortellini filling having a combination of cured and raw pork products. Like raw being just like loin, ground, shoulder, belly, and cured being some sort of like salami or, you know, for lack of a better word, some people call it deli meat. You know, something you would put on a sandwich or on your pizza, something like that.
Just to confirm, the recipe that uses prosciutto and mortadella, the recipe calls for a half of pork shoulder, but the other recipe calls for 1 of ground pork. Should we use a pound of pork shoulder? Question mark?
I'm thinking about what you just said. I'm processing it in my head. I think you can use either. What ends up happening sometimes when you grind, there's not a right answer. You could use either of those. When I'm grinding things, if I'm grinding, I'll grind the whole thing and use the pork shoulder, which usually ends up with a little less meat, or things get stuck in the grinder, or they don't all come out, which is totally fine. If you're able to get just ground pork on its own, that works as well. Sometimes I'll go either way on it. I'll grind it myself, or I'll just buy it pre-ground. I would say go with either one that you have.
If I use my KitchenAid grinder attachment, do I grind it through once or twice?
So if you use your KitchenAid grinder attachment, I like to use the 3/16 inch grinder attachment. So that's like the die size. 3/16 inch is a really great kind of filling size to use. If you don't know what size your grinder attachment is, take a look at it. We're going for like a paste here, so perhaps you need to go twice. If you're unsure, maybe just go a second time. It's not going to hurt it. If you're using the grinder, some really good best practices, make sure everything is really well chilled before grinding. What actually happens is that like grinding meat generates heat. And heat will cause fat to melt. And the key here is that we got a lot of fat going on. We got a lot of different flavors, a lot of different fat. Pork is fatty, which is wonderful. Fat is flavor. But if you have a warm grinder or warm meat and you're trying to grind it up, what ends up happening is that fat starts to melt. You have a hard time emulsifying things. And so working with cold meat in a grinder is one of those like, I don't know, pro tips. Definitely something to consider. If you're grinding sliced meat, that totally works. Sometimes it's harder if you're grinding a lot of sliced meat just because the grinder is not made to grab like thinly sliced meat, but usually you could get it through in there, especially if like you're mixing it with pork shoulder. Another thing to kind of point out, which some people did not realize, I was talking to some people on the Instagram, was that you can get large pieces of mortadella, large chunks of prosciutto from Whole Foods, like your grocery store. You go to the deli counter, just like where you'd like order your meat by the pound sliced on the machine. You know, you could ask for prosciutto, ask for mortadella, but instead of asking them to slice it thin, like you'd put on a sandwich, ask them to give you one slice at the thickest their meat slicer will go, which is usually at least an inch. And so you end up with like this fat slab of mortadella or prosciutto, which then you can cube up and turn into a dice. And then you have mortadella and prosciutto ready to go. You could freeze pieces of it if you don't need all of it, or if it's too much. You could use it for your sofritos. You could use it in your ragus. It's a great kind of outlet and way to get it without having to buy like a large piece of prosciutto or a large piece of mortadella on the internet or from like an Italian specialty store.
Should we put the mortadella and ham in a food processor to get it paste-like?
So absolutely, you can. Like I said, you could do this in a food processor. Everything, all these sliced meats, including the pork shoulder if you don't have a grinder. But I like showing that this can be done by chopping it by hand. So that's kind of why I'm doing it like this and taking the time, because not everyone has those machines and equipment. And so I don't want those people to not be able to make a really nice filling. So we're really just going to chop this as if it's going through the grinder. We're just going to keep going and going and going until it's fully ground and paste-like just from our knife.
And then back to the first question, kind of about the two different recipes. Sorry, that wasn't clear. I was trying to ask if that first recipe wasn't enough pork shoulder. Someone said to add to Cassandra, first recipe totals 1 pound of pork, second totals 2 pounds of pork.
That might just be a math issue in my head when I was trying to convert the two. I like 1 pound of ground pork to equal 1 pound of your deli meats. So does that become more clear? I hope. I think so. I usually go 1 pound and 1 pound.
So 1 to 1.
1 to 1. 1 to 1 ratio, if that makes sense.
If that
So
makes
1
sense.
part cured product, 1 part raw pork product. Although that's just like a starting point. You know, if you don't have that much pork or you have double the amount of this and half the amount of this, nothing's going to change. It's not going to be different or wrong. It's going to have a slightly different flavor, but it's still going to be delicious.
Yes.
And so, like, that's where we're going to mix it all together. We're going to taste it. I'm going to show you how to cook it and how to try it and how to see before we even get down to the pasta, how to bring this all together. So yes, I'm sorry if that was unclear. That might have just been me having a brain fart with math, because math is hard. I'm a cook. I'm not a mathematician. I'm sorry. It's my apology.
Well, you kind of are a mathematician too, in some sense.
I was a comm major, so that should tell everyone everything. We're allowed to make fun of ourselves, all right? Comm majors always make fun of themselves. What else? Other questions?
At the end, should your filling be pretty paste-like? Yes.
Yes. So if you jumped ahead and you already made the whole filling and brought it together, it should be paste-like. You're essentially making like an emulsified sausage. So that's where the egg comes in. It's a very high ratio of ingredients, pork to cheese. It may seem like too much cheese. Like, it's a lot of ground parm, but you know, that region of Italy, Emilia-Romagna, where you really find tortellini in this classic filling shape, parm is king there as well. That's like the cheese of choice. So they really like to celebrate the pig. They like to celebrate the cheese. And you know what? You end up with this super robust, really intense filling. And a lot of that has to do with like the shape by engineering and by design. You know, tortellinis are little shapes. They're like these little crowns that fit on your ring. Some of like, you know, they say that you should be able to fit 10 to 12 tortellini on a spoon if like you're really making the little tiniest versions that you can of it. I don't usually make them that small myself, but the reason being is, you know, you eat one tortellini, you want to have a really intense filling because there's not a lot of filling inside of that tortellini. So by making sure your filling is packed with flavor, lots of cheese, lots of cured meat, really heavily spiced pork is really going to help ensure that each little individual tortellini is robust, is flavorful, doesn't get lost in that filling to pasta ratio, because that's always something important to consider and think about. Whenever you're considering a filling for shape, some fillings are better suited to different shapes. Like a tortellini filling, like we're making right here, this classic pork filling, would not really make sense in a really large ravioli, because that's a ton of meat that's really heavily seasoned, really heavily spiced up, and then you get a big bite of that with not as much pasta dough, and it's kind of like, whoa, that was really intense. That's not as pleasant. So the engineering of the filling and the shape is something you always want to think about as a chef, as a cook, as a pasta maker. You can't just you can do whatever you want, but in theory, you're thinking about those things and not just blindly pairing fillings with shapes because that's what you feel like making that day. Well, you can totally do that.
What is both of your favorite pasta types to make and to eat if they're different?
Tortellini is one of my favorite types to make. The whole like origin story of how I learned how to make tortellini and where I learned to make tortellini happened at Quince when I was working there here in San Francisco. I was there for about 3 years. Super fine dining, like 3 Michelin star restaurant, and known for their pasta program. And so that's where I learned got into the world of pasta, fell in love with pasta making. And what actually happened was Chef Tusk came back from Italy. He spent some time in Bologna learning how to make tortellini from like all of the nonas and the grandmothers there that sit around making tortellinis for hours. Like these women are like make 120 pounds of tortellini a day, like crazy amounts of tortellini, nonstop all day. And they do it all by hand. They have no machines. I think they have machines to grind the meat, or they get it from the butcher shop downstairs, but no pasta making machines. They do it all with rolling pins. And so he came back and he wanted to, you know, showcase that dish on the menu and make it our way there. And so we weren't allowed to use any machines either. It was all done by hand. We were allowed to grind the filling, but the dough had to be kneaded by hand, no machine. You weren't allowed to use the pasta machine. You had to use a rolling pin, and then cutting and shaping everything by hand. And that was the only dish I was responsible for about 6 months. And it was was a tasting menu, so every single diner got a plate of it or a bowl of it. We did about 18 pieces per person, and it was about 80 people we served a night. So if you do the math, like I said, I'm not a mathematician. I don't know how many pieces of tortellini that is in one day. Bella, help me out.
A lot.
A lot? It's a lot. What ends up happening is I had to make them all, and so I just spent a lot of time making it, going out to the dining room every morning, bringing out my pasta board, setting up on a table, and just making tortellini for hours straight until service came. And then I would stay late at night, make tortellini all night long, and it just became like this labor of love. I really fell in love with the whole process of like settling into the pasta station, finding my groove, my zen moment, clearing my mind. And it became this like very therapeutic process for how crazy the day was and how stressful it was working in the restaurant. Making pasta became this thing I fell in love with, and it was my like escape from like all that craziness that was happening in the kitchen, because those kitchens are intense, especially when you're cooking at that level. It's no joke. So tortellini, for that reason, always holds a special place in my heart. That was making, and then what? Eating was the other one. Eating, I really like ricotta raviolis, like with red sauce, because I grew up eating those almost every Sunday. My mom would make those. I just love like good ricotta raviolis, and like surprisingly, they're hard to find. Like it's almost like a lost art form. Like you can't just go to any Italian restaurant or any place that serves pasta and find a ricotta ravioli with red sauce. So it's like that's a special fun thing for me too. I love that one to eat.
Do you have a recommendation for what meats to use as a non-pork option for the recipe?
I mean, that's a good question. It's hard to say because then you're kind of like getting out of the world of tortellini. Like you could use ground beef, you could use lots of parm, and then just season it up the same way. It's not going to have the same flavor profile. It's not going to have the same texture, but you could do it. You could use ground chicken, and you can make a little chicken tortellini. You know what I'm actually doing? I wanted people to see how finely ground we are here. That's why I switched the cameras, and then you hit me with a question. I'm doing a lobster and burrata tortellini on a takeout dinner kit coming soon, but that's another story for later.
That's after.
But yeah, I'm doing lobster and burrata, so that works as well.
You have to message.
You need a really robust, intense filling if you're going to substitute it out and not use pork. So just think of it like that. You want something very flavorful. So what we have here, take a look, super finely ground, almost paste-like. Like you see no more pieces. This is like almost what it would look like if it came out of a grinder, which, you know, is what you want. You just got to keep going. It helps sometimes to smear, and that sounds like a really weird word to use when you're chopping things. But when you're going for a really fine chop, to smear it across the cutting board and then come through using your left hand if you're right-handed to help balance that end of the knife, and then you're able to chop across in the other direction with that hand. So this is what we end up with. Very finely ground, no tools, no machines required, because I still use the tool, right? I use the tool. Don't want to get called out there. And then we could go into our bowl. So we'll give our hands a quick wipe. We're going to get our bench scraper. This can help pick everything up. Bench scrapers are awesome. I love them. Use them in everything. All this trim that's not chopped up, I'm just going to get it off my cutting board just so it doesn't make a mess. All of this is going to go into my ground pork here. So if you were catching up or you use the machine or whatever, you have all of your ground meat here in a bowl. If you have a KitchenAid or a stand mixer, I would do it in the stand mixer with the paddle attachment. It works really well. I'm going to do it by hand for everyone out there that doesn't have one. All right? So following along either way. This is for everyone. I don't want to leave anyone behind. If you have a food processor, I would only chop it in the food processor. I would still mix it by hand. I don't think you're going to get a good mix trying to mix it in the food processor. I haven't tried it, but I'm just based on what I know about food processors and how that all comes together. So we're going here in the bowl. Perfect. Quick wipe. Let's get all this stuff out of the way. We're done with this. See you later, cutting board. Don't need that anymore. Let's get any of our little loose bits that flew off our cutting board out of the way. Any other questions before we continue?
No questions so far. I hope
no
everyone's
so far.
cooking along.
All right, fantastic. So we got our filling here. All of our cheese, everybody in. We're essentially making a sausage here, a nice emulsified meat mix. What actually ends up happening when you add saltiness to protein, meat in particular, there's a high amount of myosin, which is a type of protein that's found in meat. That's how sausages become emulsified and come together. When you add salt to myosin, they bond and interact. You start to mix them. Things get sticky and creamy and emulsified, and that's how meat gets held together. So we want to have that reaction happening here. So we start with our cheese. We'll go in with our egg. And I usually only like 1 egg for like every 2 pounds of meat. I've seen recipes of this that use 2 eggs for every pound of meat, or 1 egg for every pound. I kind of like dial it back because I don't want it to be like really hard, where 2 eggs will turn into like a nice firm meatball versus 1 egg for every 2 pounds of meat will kind of have a nice smoother, creamier, more melty, fall apart texture. We have nutmeg. I'm using freshly grated here. If you've been taking these classes for a long time, you know how hard it was for me to find a whole nutmeg clove versus using the finely ground stuff. Freshly ground stuff is far superior. If you have the pre-ground nutmeg, that's okay. You probably will end up needing a little more than if you didn't and you're using this. I usually just eyeball it. Some people like a little more nutmeg than others. What was that, 15 seconds of going back and forth? Maybe, not even, 10 seconds. And you could always add more. Like I said, we're going to flavor this, we're going to taste it, we're going to see where we're at, and we can adjust. Nutmeg's one of those ingredients, it's like a warm spice. There's a lot of wonderful spices in mortadella. Mortadella gets its name from using a mortar and pestle to grind all those spices, caraway, clove, cinnamon, nutmeg, mace, allspice, all of that usually finding its way into some versions of mortadella. You use a mortar and pestle to grind all those spices. You use it to season all of the meat, and you have this wonderful pork product that is, you know, here in the U.S. it evolved to bologna, believe it or not, and that's kind of, mortadella is the origin of bologna, from Bologna. Who would have known? But, you know, that nutmeg usually kind of brings out those warm spices that you find in the mortadella, which I really personally enjoy.
A couple questions. I'm going to start with the dairy allergy because we are making the filling currently. Dairy allergy over here, sub for parm, or okay to leave it out?
You can leave the parm out, absolutely. I'm going black pepper here. You leave the parm out if you have a dairy allergy. Just keep in mind the parm adds a nice cheesiness, a nice creaminess. It adds umami. It adds flavor. It adds texture. It's so much more than just like parm. So you could use miso. You could use nutritional yeast. You could use some of those ingredients that like kind of give you that umami, cheesy flavor without adding the cheese, like you would use in like vegan or non-dairy recipes. You could just omit it entirely. Use a little more salt, a little more pepper to kind of like up some of those flavors. Trying to think of other dairy, non-dairy subs in there. But I think if you go that route, you should be okay.
Nutritional yeast probably.
Miso would be really nice too.
And then what wine should we be drinking tonight?
Bella, what wine should we be drinking tonight?
I mean, really anything medium bodied probably would be
a nice
really
medium
good.
body wine.
Yeah.
We got the really rich butter sauce. You know, any sort of bubbles I think would be really nice with that to kind of cut through our porky, salty filling, to go through our creamy, rich, buttery sauce. I love Lambrusco. I love bubbles. I like a dry Lambrusco because it's like different. It's rich, it's red, it is fruity, it's, you know, tart, and it kind of has all of those notes that contrast with the food. I'm more of like, when I do pairings or when I'm like wanting to do a pairing, I want something that contrasts with the dish versus complements with the dish, which is just another way to kind of like look at pairings. So you can either find a wine that has all of those same flavor profiles, and like you're eating the food, you're drinking the wine, you're like, oh my God, these taste almost the same. They're incredible, same sort of flavors. Or you kind of go the other route, where you're like, you take a bite of the food, you take a sip of the wine, you're like, oh, these are contrasting. These like balance each other out.
You want
have this
something that
really kind of opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And when you're at the opposite end of the spectrum starts to touch again. Whoa.
Next, is the Doghouse Forge going to be getting things back in stock? They're out of pasta rollers.
Great question.
They all make them by hand.
They're all made by hand.
Yes.
So he makes them all himself. And I was just talking to him this morning, actually.
So stay tuned.
We're looking at February. I think beginning of February will be the pre-order for shipping the end of February because he has to make them all once they're ordered. But this next round will have bench scrapers. They will have the fluted. Where's my version? The fluted version of the cutter. So that way you're able to make your agnolotti and raviolis with the fluted. And then there'll be more pizza and pasta wheel, regular Rotello cutters. So we're looking at February.
And then let's just go over one more time
what's
inside
in the bowl
of your bowl right now.
Perfect.
Because that was the next question.
Yep. So we have our grated parm. We have all of our salami meats. We have our ground pork. We have our egg. We have our nutmeg. And we have a nice big healthy pinch of salt. Don't go too crazy with the salt. Cheese is salty. All your prosciutto and ham and mortadella is salty. The only thing that's not salted in here is essentially your pork shoulder or ground pork. So start with a little less. You could always add a little more. We're going to cook it and taste it and see. And I'll show you how to do that. But we got to mix it first, right? So I'm just going to use a spatula. You could use your hands. It's like making meatballs, right? A spatula works just as well. But you want to get everything in here. A nice big bowl definitely helps so you don't make a mess. And if you have a stand mixer with a paddle attachment, 1000%, use that and just kind of beat this together on medium speed until it becomes nice and sticky and pasty. But like I said, I'm doing this the hard way. They call this fatto a mano in Italian, which means what? Made by hand. So here we are, making this by hand.
Where's the pasta roller from? Pasta Biz, and it's Imperia, is that correct?
This is an Imperia pasta sheeter from Pasta Biz. That's not to say you can't get a pasta sheeter from anywhere else. I really like this one. It's like a great step up from the KitchenAid attachment. It's obviously more expensive than the KitchenAid attachment. The KitchenAid attachment's a nice step up from the hand crank. And if you already have a KitchenAid, the attachment is all you need. You don't need the cutter tools and like the whole set that comes with everything. It's a waste of your time, waste of the money. You can cut noodles by hand. You don't need the attachment. Just get the sheeter, the rollers for the KitchenAid machine.
And then we do not have nutmeg, so use a tiny bit of allspice.
Ooh.
I poached a bit and it tasted delicious. Oh, great.
Nice.
That's
well
good
done.
To know. Do they ship to Canada?
Pasta Biz, yeah, I think everybody ships internationally. Doghouse 4 ships internationally. Pasta Biz ships internationally because they actually get everything from Italy. So
yes.
if they're getting it from another country, for sure they could send it to another country.
Yes. Fairly
certain. Yeah, that definitely check them out at Pasta Biz on Instagram. They're a small San Francisco-based company. It's essentially like a small group of guys. Emilio Midi is the Italian connection there, and then he has a whole team. Giacomo is probably the one you'd be dealing with if you were looking to purchase or buy anything, or were talking to them on Instagram. Really, really awesome. Really good people. It's always good to support a small business like that.
Tell them Joe sent you.
Yeah, tell him I sent you.
Your buddy Joe.
Yeah, be like, yeah, my buddy Joe Sasto. I know him. We're best friends. He sent me. That's okay. You can name drop.
Yay! Someone else just also coached us to test a meatball out.
Exactly. So I wanted to show that just so everybody knows what those people are talking about. But take a look here first. Our filling. Look, it has come together. It is nice and sticky. It is emulsified. It is mixed. It almost looks creamy. Like if you go to spread it, you'd see the meat is bound and held together. And that's what we're looking for. Okay, nice, everything equally incorporated. And if you're doing it by hand, it does take a minute or two of mixing. It does take a little bit of elbow grease. What a weird word. That's another one of those phrases I'm not into. Elbow grease.
Let's not use it.
Let's not use that, all right?
No.
Everybody, let's stop saying that, okay? So, it takes a little bit of that mixing power to get this to come together. And then we got to taste our dough. If you were reading the recipe, you probably know exactly what's going to happen next. If you weren't reading the recipe, guess what's going to happen next? We're going to get a little small pot. You could use your big pot of pasta water. This would be a good time to put some pasta water on the stove if you plan on cooking along. So we're going to use a small pot here just to test. I have a big pot to cook my pasta later. Get them both started. You're okay right now if you just start heating up water. And we're going to go for a simmer. Very gentle simmer. We're going to take a small piece of our filling. And we're going to make a little mini meatball. All right? That's all it is. Our little mini meatball, as soon as our water comes to a simmer, we could drop our meatball into the water, poach it for like 1, maybe 2 minutes. That's all it takes. Then we could eat it. So that way we're not eating the raw pork or the raw egg. And we have a feeling and an idea of what this is going to taste like cooked. And then we can adjust our seasoning, maybe a little more salt, maybe a little more nutmeg, maybe a little more pepper. Our ratio of cheese to meat is pretty spot on at this point because that's a good ratio to follow is what we already have. And in the meantime, I can get rid of all of my spillage once again. Everyone else has already tasted and poached their filling, it sounds like.
Or they maybe still be making it.
Or they're just watching,
If
which is totally
cooking,
okay too.
I probably would still be making my filling. I wouldn't
Yeah,
use
when Bella cooks, it sometimes takes a while. But she does make some really good cookies. I can vouch for that. So we're going here, as soon as our water comes up to a simmer, let's go a little higher to help ourselves along in the process. And then we can jump onto the dough. I don't know if I'm going to need any more of my spices or flavors here. Let's go down underneath. Hope I'm all done. I could always pull that back out if I need to. Give yourself a good wipe down. Working and cleaning in phases helps keep your station nice and neat
and clean
and organized. Then you can feel better about what you're doing in the kitchen. You're not lost. You're not swimming through dishes. You have a nice, tight, clean, organized. I have a little pile. That's going to do dishes later. It makes cooking less stressful.
And more fun.
We're boiling here. We're going to drop our little tester ball into the water. I have a slotted spoon for tasting. Let's pull out of the water. It doesn't need to be slotted. I'm just fancy. A little extra, huh? You're not looking for a crazy boil. A crazy boil is going to firm up the meat really hard. And you want to think about this filling as being inside of pasta. So it's going to have that pasta wrapper to protect it from the hard boiling water. So same thing when you're poaching to taste. Don't salt the water. Don't go in a hard, crazy boil. Otherwise, you're not going to get the best representation of what it's going to taste like or be like inside of your pasta. And really, any raw filling that you're working with, if you're making sausage, if you're making any sort of like cured meat or something like that, it's always great to kind of use this little poaching technique, whether it's fish, chicken, pork, beef, seafood. You can always get a little taster out of the way. We do this all the time in the restaurant. Sometimes with sausage, I'll do a little patty and sear it in a pan because I want to know what it tastes like caramelized. But in this case, we're not caramelizing the filling, so I don't need to know what it tastes like caramelized. We're poaching it because that's what it's going to taste like when it's cooked. Make sense? I think so.
I think so.
Here we go. We're at about a minute. It's a small bit of pork. Cooks very fast. It's hot. Don't burn your mouth. Oh, baby. So good. You should taste everything. I'll talk you through it. Flavors. So much going on. Bouncing all over the palate.
Describe the flavors.
I taste the ham, the mortadella, those meats. Then you get a bit of cheesiness, that nice like nuttiness and tang from the parm. Then you're hit like on the back of the palate with like black pepper. You taste that black pepper. And then it kind of like rounds everything out. You're almost like, what is that other flavor in there? I can't really place it. That's the nutmeg. If you taste the nutmeg, maybe you add a little too much, which is all right. But in theory, you shouldn't taste the nutmeg. It should be that thing right in the background that kind of like leaves you wondering that you're like, ooh, I need another bite of that. What was that? And that's where you're like, okay, we're a good season. It's intense. You're going to have a small little bite of it. Nice bit of salt in there. I'm happy with where we're at. We can set this aside. We don't need to put it in a piping bag or anything today. We're going to go right from the bowl into the pasta dough. Bada bing, bada boom.
Yeah.
We're done with our water here. This could say see you later. We're done with this. We're done with this. All underneath. We're going to have our filling on the side. And then we are ready to make pasta. Do we have questions yet?
I think that you should talk about pasta water again, just one more time, just to make everyone make sure that they have pasta water.
Oh, if you haven't put pasta water on the stove, do that.
How much pasta water?
Fill up a pot of water for cooking the pasta. You don't need a giant pot. It doesn't need to be a cauldron. You don't need your turkey deep frying pot. That's way too much water. You need probably about a quart of water per person or per serving size of pasta that you're making. So I have a 3-quart pot of water on the stove. That's going to be enough to make tortellini for 2. You could go a little bigger if you want to make lots of tortellini. But get that going. Low heat, no salt. Throw a lid on it. That way it's there, ready, waiting for you when it's time to cook. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good?
Yes.
All right, where's my dough? Here we go.
Someone said, wow, so good. You taste every one of the meats in there. Oh, great.
Nice. That's right. That means you did it right.
Yes.
We're in a good place. So I have my dough rested. I like to rest in these vacuum seal bags. Totally optional. It's nice because it prevents oxidation and it force hydrates everything just so they rest faster. Totally not something you need to do, but something I like to do just before anybody's like, whoa, what is that? That's how I do it.
Joe, we made fresh chicken broth. Don't we need it?
So, great question. If you did not read the class description on Chef's Feed, we are going to finish this my favorite way. We're putting it in a butter sauce. I'm going to show you how to make a pan sauce out of butter. I like using really nice fancy butter and just glazing all of the pasta in butter and cheese. Think of it as like the best version of mac and cheese that you can get your hands on. Traditionally or classically, yes, you would poach these in chicken stock. You would serve them in chicken stock. You'd have a nice big bowl of soup with all of your little tortellinis floating in it. We're not talking about chicken stock. We're not learning how to make chicken stock. There's a bajillion recipes on YouTube and the internet on how to make chicken stock. It's not a secret. So if that's the way you want to go, I give you permission.
You put that as an option for those who did want to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's an option. Go ahead. But that's not what we're doing today. So I thought I made that clear in the class description. If not, I apologize again.
Oh, they wanted to do both. Oh, perfect.
Oh,
great.
Nice. Side by side. I always support a side by side decision.
I do too.
If you're going with chicken stock, yes, get it on the stove. Start heating that up too. Very low, gently, lid on.
Yeah.
So that way you have them both ready to go. Pasta, water, and chicken stock.
Yes.
If you really want to go like classic, you're going to cook your tortellini in the chicken stock. That's like the way it's done, or the way, it should be done. But you need quite a bit of chicken stock to do that, usually at least like 2 quarts or so. So just something to consider, but yes, that'd be great. Question.
We do have a question about the salt in the pasta water.
No.
Why don't you salt the pasta water yet, Chef?
So 2 reasons why you don't salt the pasta water yet. I do salt my pasta water, just not yet. Salted water takes longer to come to a boil. That's just science. And 2, if you salt it now, and it starts to reduce, it's going to be over-seasoned. Where if you wait to salt it till right before we're about to use it, then it'll be perfectly seasoned exactly where we want it. Cool?
Yes.
Pro tips.
Yeah, I have a couple more questions before we start making pasta. Yeah. If I'm not eating it tonight, how should I store it? The filling? Yes.
Good question. So if you're not eating this tonight and you want to know how to store the filling, I would put it in like what's it called? A Tupperware. Put it in a Tupperware, a deli container, one of those to-go takeout boxes, like with a lid. You keep it in like a zip top bag, nice and airtight, you would like your ham or your deli meat. Airtight container is going to be your best way. On top of that, if you ended up with a lot of filling and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't need that much, you could either make meatballs, you could make little patties and throw it into your next ragu or something.
Breakfast.
Or mix it into eggs, hash sausage, or put it in an airtight container and freeze it. I usually always have tortellini filling in the freezer for tortellini emergencies. Mm-hmm. So if you want to be like me, you can freeze some and always have them for your tortellini emergencies. Because, we all have those. There are nacho emergencies and there are tortellini emergencies. Both of them equally as important, and you always want to be prepared no matter what happens.
I'm likely doing a follow-up later today. Would you throw parm rinds in the chicken stock?
Absolutely, that'd be great. Parm rinds in the chicken stock would add a nice parmy flavor, especially since you have the parm in the filling. The one thing to be mindful of is don't let your rinds sink to the bottom of the pan. Otherwise, you'll hate yourself trying to clean it. What you can do is like wrap them in cheesecloth or put them in something so they're suspended. Like even if you put them in like a strainer and then so the strainer's not touching the bottom of the pan. So what ends up happening is the parm rinds hit the bottom of the pan because you're in a liquid broth. They'll all sit at the bottom. The cheese will melt off the rind. Even if it doesn't look like there's cheese on there, there's still cheese on there. And you're just going to end up with this like burnt, very hard to clean, cheesy mess on the bottom of your pot that it's a bummer. So don't do that. Keep your rinds suspended either in cheesecloth or some other way, constantly stirring, which would be kind of miserable. You'd have to stand there the whole time. But something to be mindful of. It's not the same as putting them in tomato sauce because they don't sink to the bottom of tomato sauce. They sink to the bottom of stock.
My dough has been resting for an hour. Is that enough?
If your dough's only been resting an hour, I don't want to say a yes or no. Potentially, it could be ready. I've gone as short as like 30 minutes when I've like been competing in a competition cooking style series, which, is very hard to kind of force the dough that way. If you start to roll it out and you see your dough is kind of bouncing back on you and not stretching, yeah, you have to wrap it back up and wait. But you could always try and roll it out with us right now and see what happens. I'm not going to say it's not going to work because it could. Sometimes an hour is all you need. A lot of it has to do with the way that you develop the gluten and how quickly you developed it. And that kind of like then will dictate how long of a rest it needs.
And then the person who said, I'm not eating it tonight, how should I store it? They meant store the pasta, which you will get into.
We'll get to that.
Yes.
Don't worry.
All right.
All right, so we have our dough ball. One of the most important things, hopefully you were paying attention to the end of the videos when we were talking about dough making, is taking those extra 30 seconds at the end of your knead to make sure your dough is nicely shapen before putting it to rest. You don't want to leave this jagged, rough kind of clump of ball all over the place just wrapped up, because then you're starting with a very obtuse, weird shape piece of dough that makes it very hard to roll. So take those extra 30 seconds. Make sure your dough is shaped nicely. You have all of the butt ends tucked in down underneath, and then you have a nice smooth surface on the top, and everything is kind of like nice and compact. As we pull this out, we need bench flour, right? A little bit of 00 goes a long way, helps things from stopping to stick. If your dough is sticking to your plastic wrap or whatever that you use to rest it, that's okay. Very carefully pull it out and away. You'll be okay. You might need a little more bench flour than if you were not sticking. Either way, you need a little bit. The reason why, a little bit of flour on the surface of the dough helps pull moisture to the surface. And if you've ever seen pasta dough that kind of has that like leathery texture, that's like a sign of a really good pasta dough or a really good pasta maker. So if your dough gets leathery with that little crackly look in there about halfway through here, you're doing things right. That's what you're looking for. That bit of texture is what you need. And in order to achieve that, you need to flour the surface of your dough very lightly, because that's going to pull moisture out and it's going to cause the dough to dry with that kind of like crackly, awesome texture on it. And then you want the flour to stop things from sticking, okay?
My butt ends won't stay together.
The butt ends underneath. If they're not staying together, you haven't rested your dough enough. You're still kneading right now, I imagine, if they're not sticking together. If you're kneading and they're not coming together, that's okay. They don't come together till it rests and relaxes. And then they all kind of like, ooh, and fall into each other. They're not going to totally come together as you're doing the kneading process, unless your dough is like entirely too dry. If it's like really just kind of like not working, a little bit of water goes a long way. That's where the spray bottle comes into play. If you're really unsure, send me a message. I'll take a look at it. We can talk about this further, just you and I. All right? So we have our dough here. What we want to look at, we're using the machine today. No matter what kind of machine you have, whether it's a hand crank, whether it's this really nice one that does all the work for you, or you have that mid-grade KitchenAid attachment, you've got to do some work. You've got to use this rolling pin. There's no way around it. If you try to just put this piece of dough into whatever roller you have, it is not going to work. The machine is not good enough to turn this dough into pasta. You got to put in the work to make it happen. So that's where the rolling pin comes in, and that's where this little pre-shaping goes a long way. So starting with the rolling pin in the center of the dough, I like to push it down, give myself a nice little indent in there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to, using the weight of our hands, push from the center outwards all the way to the end. Rolling pasta dough is not like rolling pie dough. There's none of this back and forth. That is not a pasta rolling move. No. It's not controlled. You're not putting pressure in an equal, even area, and you're kind of just letting whatever happen. You don't want to let whatever happen. happens. You want to control what's happening. So we're only going to push away from us from the center of the dough all the way out to the end. And that's going to keep things even. It's going to help us make sure the dough is extending evenly in all of the directions. And that we don't end up with any thick spots in the middle and thin spots at the end. So that way we have dough coming all the way out evenly. Now this, if it looks wider than your machine, that's okay. We're going to get to that. What we're focusing on right now is making sure it is as thin as the thickest setting on your machine. Here's your machine, thickest setting. The reason being, think of it like this. Look, here we are. You have your dough, a very thick piece of dough. If you try to put it into a tiny hole, it's just not going to work. You need a thin piece of dough to go into a tiny hole so that way it could come out even thinner. That's the best visual demonstration I could do right there without Alton Brown tools and puppets. Imagine these as my little pasta puppets, okay? Back to our dough. We're starting from the center, rolling out to the end, turning it around, rolling from the center, out to the end. Now, next thing, look at this. We have this really weird, obtuse oval shape. Next mistake I see a lot of people make. They start with an oval, they put an oval into the machine, and what ends up happening, I'm going to move this over here just for you can see the machine every time I point to it. You end up with an oval here, and if you try to stretch an oval, the ends are just going to become even more elongated as it comes out of the machine. Not the best, right? So pasta dough is actually made to be stretched. It's made to be manipulated. So what you can do is actually manipulate it. Use your hands and grab and stretch. Come around to this side. Grab and stretch. And help yourself stay in a geometric shape. Now we are much more still in that rectangular pattern that's going to come very nicely out of our machine. So now as this gets extended, it's going to stay in a nice long square or a nice long rectangle that we're going to get the most out of our shapes. Versus if you leave it in that alligator tail, you're going to end up with a very, very long and narrow alligator tail. Now, one, is not fun to work with, and two, you don't get a very good yield out of it. So as you're rolling...
Does your dough retract a little bit?
If your dough's retracting, it didn't rest long enough. That's the gluten kind of springing back on you.
It's like, no.
It's like, no, I'm not ready. I don't want to be stretched out yet. I'm not ready for this. So let your dough be ready. Let it relax. Let it rest. Let it come to room temperature. Come back to it 20, 30 minutes. Maybe all it needs is another 10. It's hard to say. But if it's coming back to you, it needs to rest a little longer. All the way out to the end. Wonderful. Pulling out my edges. Don't be afraid to kind of pre-shape your dough before it goes into the machine. Because what you put into the machine, or what comes out of the machine, is only going to be as good as what you put into the machine. So starting with a nice, beautiful rectangle like this is going to give me a nice, big, beautiful rectangle that comes out. I'm going to have a much more better yield. A much more better. Not proper English, but proper pasta making.
Much more better.
Much more better, okay? Now, you have this big, giant rectangle. You have a tiny, small pasta sheeter. Maybe your pasta sheeter is only this wide. What are you going to do? I'm going to tell you exactly what you're going to do. It's going to be okay. You're going to take a roller, or you're going to take a knife, and you're going to split it right down the center. Then you're going to have these two strips. Should I do it with mine?
You don't have to.
No, it's okay. You'll have two strips, and you're just going to work with two strips as if it's two pieces of dough. And you're just going to work with them at two different times. What you're going to do is keep one strip in a zip top bag. Any dough you're not working with, our little rule here is going to be kept in the zip top bag, and then that way it doesn't dry out. All right?
If using a pasta sheeter with a hand crank, what number should we be rolling to?
Great question. We're about to jump over to the sheeter, and we'll talk about it. So this is ready to go into the sheeter. I'm just going to cover this with a little plastic so it doesn't dry out too much while I talk, because I don't know how long I'm going to be talking, and I don't want that to dry. So even this makes a big difference, right? Onto our machine. So hand crank, KitchenAid, something like this, they all have numbers over here. What do those numbers mean? I'm gonna blow some minds here, and I hope nobody gets upset about it. They don't mean anything. They are totally arbitrary. They're just numbers put there by the machine maker so that you as a pasta maker have consistency every time you make pasta on your machine. If there were no numbers here, you wouldn't know where you're turning that knob every time you go to make pasta. And then you would just be totally guessing. You'd end up etching into the side of your machine so you know where you're turning your knob. And if you look at really old pasta machines, they don't have notches. They don't have numbers. People like carve in on the metal where they like their pasta to. So that being said, I can't prescribe to you what number you like to eat or what number you should use for your machine. What I can tell you are things to look for. What I can tell you is how to use your machine. But then you still need to decide based on the dough recipe that you're using, because yes, every dough recipe is going to be rolled out to a different number because it cooks differently, it souffles differently, it's going to puff up differently. And depending on the shape that you're making, depending on if you're making a tagliatelle or a ravioli or a tortellini, you're going to probably want to cut it and roll it to a different size. All of that makes a difference. And there's nothing wrong with doing some tests with yourself. Cut a small piece of dough off, roll it to number 2, roll it to number 1, roll it to number 3, 1, 2, 3, cook it in water, taste them side by side and be like, oh yeah, this one I love this. You're the cook. You get to decide what thickness you want your pasta to be. Some people like it really thick and chewy. Some people don't. And so I can't tell you, hey, always go to number 4 because that's the best number for tortellini. That's not a thing. There's no rule that says that. And I'm sorry if someone misled you to believe that. But that's really the truth of the matter. That being said, there are some rules we can use for rolling out to make things easy and efficient and streamlined, and we'll talk about that. Some machines count up, some machines count down. So that's another example of the numbers meaning nothing. Mine goes from 10 to 0, 10 being the thickest, 0 being the thinnest. My KitchenAid's the opposite. If I put on my KitchenAid attachment, where 0 is the thickest and 8 is the thinnest. So it's not even the same range of numbers. So we're not looking at the numbers as something to refer to. They're just a reference for me internally in my mind or in my notebook or on my cell phone, on my notepad, to know, hey, I like this shape at this number. I like this shape on this number. I like this shape on this number. And I actually have a page in my book, not my cookbook, in my book that I write in, that has all of those notes there for me because I can't memorize everything, and so I write it down. And I encourage you to do the same thing. Was there a question there?
No, basically, so you probably like it from the thinnest.
So that's kind of like my next thing was if you twisted my arm and you forced me to tell you.
I'm forcing you now.
A number. Second from the thinnest. So not the thinnest setting. Usually one notch wider from the thinnest is a good kind of place to start. Rarely ever, even on all of my machines, do I go to the thinnest setting. It's usually way too thin, and for like pastries or things like that, like cannolis are really well, or crackers work really well on the thinnest setting. Pasta, not so much. So I would say start on either 2 up or 1 up from the thinnest, and then taste it, try it, take notes, and go from there. Cool? Cool. Let's do it. So we're going into the machine here now. No matter what kind of machine you have, if it's automatic, if you have a hand crank, I'm going to pretend I have a hand crank, just so everyone can see what I'm doing. Here, let's switch this back. Whoa. Sorry. I almost threw the screen off the screen.
Oh, no.
You're going to see it in a second happen with the delay. So I'm going to pretend I have a hand crank, just so I'm only using one hand. And if you only have one hand, you're making pasta by yourself, here's the one thing you have to focus on. And a lot of people make this mistake, and I stress it the most, because even when I'm like watching someone make pasta, I watch them make this mistake, and they do it because they're just like so focused on what's happening down here, they're not paying attention to what's happening up here. What do I mean by that? So we're putting our dough into the machine, right? It's going to go in, it's going to come out the bottom. Don't worry about this. Do not worry about what's coming out the bottom. That happens automatically. You have no control over what comes out of the bottom, so just let it happen. You don't need to have a hand down there. You don't need to focus on it. Once your dough comes through, then you can pull it out. What you do have control over and what you can focus on is this hand up here. What's happening as things go into the machine. So you get some pressure. There's going to be tension. The machine's going to be pulling the dough away from you. What this back hand needs to do is provide counter tension. What I mean by that is like using the underside the back of your hand, hold the dough back. Guide the dough into the machine. If you see that it's going in one direction, you can turn it. You can move it. You can pull it tight and taut so that it doesn't bunch up as it goes in. That's like, if I could say there's one tip for people to focus on when they're using their pasta sheeter, it's this backhand. It's focusing on the quality of the dough that's going in and not worrying about what's coming out. Because if you focus on what goes in, you're going to have a good thing that comes out. If you're not paying attention to what's happening over here and you're just standing here like this and you have this very loose, rubbly dough kind of just going into the machine and you're down here focusing on that, it's not going to work out for you. It's going to get messed up. So that's the biggest thing. One other note for all the KitchenAid users out there, the KitchenAid attachment, you have variable speed control because you turn the machine on. Go with at least a 3 or a 4. That seems really fast. It's going to be fast and loud. You're going to be like, oh my God, it's crazy. Get used to it. All right. What ends up happening is if you go on a lower speed, it's like trying to drive a car in the wrong gear. The car doesn't like it. You don't like it. It feels weird. And a KitchenAid's the same way. There are gears in there. So if you try to push hard dough through a set of sheeters on too low of a gear, the sheeters aren't going to have enough power to squeeze the dough efficiently, and it's going to kind of stress the dough out. It's going to stress the machine out, and it's going to go through so slowly that it's not going to elongate and pull out those elastic properties of the dough. So I say at least a 3 or a 4 if you're on the KitchenAid. Speed, not dial notch.
Speed.
Ready?
Yes.
All right. First time in, back hand. This is the important hand over here. Into the machine. Oh, I'm turning, I'm cranking, right? There we go, it came out, perfect. Now I'm gonna rotate this 180 degrees. The reason why is I want even dough mass moving to both ends of the dough as it goes into the machine. If I constantly put the same end in, the dough is always gonna be being pushed in that direction. And you don't want that. Otherwise you're gonna gator tail that whole end of the dough. Where if I turn this, every time it goes into the machine, moving it down 1 notch, I'm gonna keep a nice even, elongated dough as it goes in. Don't be afraid as it goes into the machine, these first couple passes, to get back in there with your hands and stretch your dough back into your rectangle shape if you see it's starting to go into that gator tail. We don't want any gator tails here today, people, all right? 1 notch at a time. You don't need to do any numbers more than once. It's unnecessary. So just starting at the widest, working your way slowly all the way down. Next, in, using this back hand, creating pressure back here to hold the dough in place. Very important. We're turning it. We're going to come back in. 1 notch down. Back hand, holding the dough. We're turning. We're cranking. We're going. Now, we're here. After a couple of passes, you may notice your dough is getting a little sticky. Maybe it's getting a little soft, but you don't see that same kind of like non-stick coating from that layer of flour. Let's talk about how do we dust our dough with flour. This is another very important technique that I see a lot of people do wrong, and it's very easy to do wrong. And I'll show you why. Let's take a look here. If we're going to come in and sprinkle flour, first of all, if you're going to use this cup thing, please stop. This is completely uncontrollable on how much flour you're sprinkling down. What you can use is your hand. Our hands are our best tools, believe it or not. We don't always need a little cup thingy. So what you can do, well, this is what I see everyone do. They take flour, they're right over the surface of the dough, and they go like this. That is way too much flour. It's in these big, thick chunks, and it's not evenly spaced over this whole piece of dough. What you should and can be doing is to take that same bit of flour, hold your hand almost upside down. So the bottom of your hand is here, the flour is up here. Put your thumb on top of your pile of flour and shake your hand from up high. And that allows you to then evenly disperse flour in a nice fine mist all over the whole surface of the dough. You could then come in, just give it a little quick brush to make sure everything is nice and even. If you give this a quick brush, you're still left with all of this flour. That's way too much. You don't need that much flour. It's going to get things way too floury. We could flip this over, do the same thing on the other side. Let's come in. Nice and high, shaking our hand back and forth, letting that flour ever so gently come out of the dough, or come out of our hand, evenly onto the dough. And then, just for the sake of my demonstration, I got way too much flour there. We get the flour out of the way.
Way too much.
Way too much flour. We don't need it, right? So, back to our machine. That was after a couple of passes. Next notch going down. Back into our machine. Pulling with our back hand, holding everything in place. Out of the machine. One more notch all the way down. Changing the direction that goes in. And something else to notice, if this is new for you, start practicing using the back of your hands or the back of your arms. You don't want to use your fingertips because your fingertips are sharp. Sometimes you have nails. They provide too much individual pressure on where the dough is. And what you'll end up with is poking holes through the dough. Practice on using the back of your hands to pick up and handle the dough, and you're able to flip it around and manipulate it much more easily than if you use your fingertips. Something else, notice I don't have any jewelry on. This is not something for Guy Fieri that has all the rings and watches and jewelry. Take those all off, set them aside. You don't need them. What you want is nice, no watches, no iWatch. It all just gets in the way and it'll poke holes in your pasta dough, all right? Nice, empty hands. Now we're gonna go one more notch here into our machine. We're cranking. We're using our hand crank here all the way through. And now we can come in and pull out this bottom part. Machine off. Here's where, no matter what kind of machine that I'm using, I always like to stop at this point. And what's my stopping point, you might be asking? Halfway. So whatever halfway on your notch is kind of one of my golden rules here. So I go from 10, I'll stop at 4. I know that's not halfway. I don't use 0. So let's pretend we're at 5, okay? Halfway. What is halfway on your machine? Usually it's 8 to 0, so 4 is a good number in the middle. I just like saying 4, okay? So we're at 4, halfway on your machine, and we're gonna cut this into manageable pieces, because now at this point, it's starting to dry out. We can't work this quickly unless, you know, you're in a restaurant, you're doing this professionally. So this is way too much dough to have out at once. It's gonna start to dry. It's gonna become very hard to work with. So instead is what I break this up into pieces. What I mean by that is I will actually cut this up into more manageable pieces. We're talking about, 4, maybe 6-inch strips all the way down. We'll give them a nice dusting of flour from up high, and then we can stack them. These get stacked ever so nicely. Now we have this nice stack of strips here. We're going to take our zip top bag. This is going to protect our dough from the air so it stops drying out. That can go right into the bag. And now we know, because it's my golden rule, that all of these are already rolled to number 4. And we do this every time we're making pasta. And we always stop at number 4, and we always portion our sheets. So that way we're only working with the amount of dough that we can handle at once. If you're a pro and you need to make this piece bigger because that's what you're used to working with, if you're not and you need a smaller piece because you can't work that fastly, that's fine too, okay?
Did you say leathery pasta dough looks good? I'm afraid it's getting too dry.
No, so take a look here. I'll show you mine. So this is actually ideal. Partially dried, almost partially cured with all of these little micro abrasions here where it kind of looks like leather. And that is from the flour coming in contact with the surface of the dough. If you try to roll out your dough without any flour, you're going to end up with something that actually looks like leather. It's going to have this weird sheen to it where it doesn't have that same kind of texture on the surface of your dough. So always a little bit of flour, even if you think you don't need it, will help kind of bring the surface texture to your dough. If you are like, oh my gosh, this is cracking, it's still way too dry, it's really arid where you are perhaps, don't be afraid to get in there with like a spray of water, misting up in the air, letting the water fall naturally down onto your dough and your work surface. And then that way you could just gently hydrate your dough. Don't try to roll it right away. Give it like 5 seconds or so to absorb that water so you're not putting a wet piece of dough into your machine. And that way you could kind of control your moisture management much more easily. Questions?
No. That was it.
That was it. Cool. All right. So we're going to roll out this piece now. Next, here's a good tip. So I could put this in this way and it would fit in no problem. But I want to continue to roll it out in this direction because that was the direction I was going in. I don't like to change directions. I like to keep it moving the same direction so my gluten is all aligned and moving in the same line all the way across. Where if I turn this, then you kind of got this zigzag pattern of gluten and it makes a difference. But looking at this, it's not going to fit right into my machine. It might bunch up. It might get kind of like caught. Something you could do to help yourself out, great little tip here, is to take your cutter and just cut a small angle indentation into your dough. So it is almost creating this like V pattern down at the bottom. So now that's going to get pulled into the machine much more easily and you're not going to end up getting bunched up on the sides. So we're going to the machine, right in, number 2, into the machine, holding this back hand here, focusing on that, letting the dough just come out. I usually, if I end up with like a little weird piece here in the back at this point, I'll just cut that off because it gets in the way and it becomes really annoying to use. You'd save all of your trim pieces, knead them back together, depending as long as they don't dry out. You could bring them back and use them for lasagna or noodles or anything else. Last bit, pass through. We're going one from the widest, or one from the thinnest, I'm sorry. And we end up with a piece of dough where you can almost see your hands through and you have all of this wonderful texture on the surface of the dough, right? Beautiful stuff. That's what you want, texture. That's the game changer. Now we have our piece of dough ready to cut on the surface. A lot of different ways to make tortellini. I like using these cutter tools. They're already preset. You could adjust the size in between each notch. Unfortunately, these are very hard to find in the US. I don't know why they can't be found in the US. If you know where to get them in the US, please let me know because I get asked just about every day. This one comes from Bologna. What you can find in the US if you don't have one of these is a bicycle cutter. These are called bicycle cutters. They're used for pastry and things like that, but they're adjustable. You can tighten them and then you're able to cut things all at once. If you don't have one of these, that's okay. What you can use is, say, your pastry cutter. You could use a cookie tray. You could use a ruler. And you're able to use this to help cut a straight line all the way across the dough. Then you can come this way and help yourself cut a straight line all the way across the dough. We're going for little squares here. I like 1.5 inch squares. I think that's a really great size for a tortellini. You can go much smaller. You can make like 3/4 inch squares, which will give you those little tiny tortellini you can put around your pinky. You can fit a whole bunch of them onto your spoon. I don't like them that small because I think the filling gets lost. And it's just like eating pasta dough at that point, kind of like seasoned with pork. I want to have a little bit of the filling in there so that way you can taste it. Question?
We have a few questions. The KitchenAid is not as wide as your machine, so what would you do if you're using your KitchenAid?
So if I was using the KitchenAid, I go back to the beginning when I was saying we have our big piece of dough and we split it in half right down the middle. And then you have this one strip here that is skinny enough for the KitchenAid. Then the other half you're just going to stick in your bag and you're going to come back to and work later.
Great. And then do you usually laminate the dough?
Good question. I don't laminate my dough and that's, I would say, like a newer thing. 3 years ago even, I would laminate my dough. And that has a lot to do with not understanding entirely what laminating did or what I was looking for, what I wanted in my dough. So if you laminated this, one, you're losing all of that texture. You're covering it up and it goes away and you're just pressing the dough. Another thing you're doing is kneading puts air into dough. You're breathing life into it. And if you laminate the dough over and over and you put it through again, you're pressing that air out of the dough. You're just creating unnecessary layers. If you're laminating, you're creating more gluten. You're working the dough again and essentially it might need to rest again. If you properly knead your dough if you properly shape your dough at the end and get into a nice round, and you had formed that beautiful pattern where all of the edges come up into the dough, creating a beautiful ball, and everything was done beautifully and perfectly, you don't need to laminate. You could go right like we just did here, and you end up with a perfect sheet of pasta dough. I mean, albeit ignore that little thing because we cut it into small pieces, but essentially a perfect sheet of pasta dough. We didn't do any lamination. Laminating, unnecessary time if you put the right work in the beginning. If you take shortcuts in the beginning, you might need to laminate to realign your gluten, to realign your dough, to get rid of rough edges, to kind of like help fix any cosmetic issues or gluten issues you may have occurred because you did not take the time at the beginning of the dough making process. So that's my whole new, like that's a new philosophy on laminating. Had you asked me 3 years ago, I'd be like, oh yeah, every time. But now I've realized it's a waste of time. And you actually end up with a less superior product than if you do it better from the beginning. Even I'm still learning, guys. It's not like, this is a never-ending journey, a never-ending pursuit of knowledge. I never reach the point where I'm like, oh, I know everything. I'm the best in the world. No. Like, I still have things to learn. I still want to talk to other pasta makers. I still like educate myself daily, whether it be on the internet, on YouTube, on Instagram, on reading cookbooks, reading cooking magazines. Like, no matter what it is, like, I'm still constantly learning and absorbing new information and changing my philosophy and beliefs on the way things should be done and the way that I do things because I learned something new. And I'm like, wow, that's cool. That's better than the way I did it. Now that's going to be my new way to do it. And so, like, I'm open and fluid to that, and I feel bad for anyone that doesn't have that mindset because then you just like reach a ceiling and there's no breakthrough, there's no getting better, and there's like then you're only so good. Where if you're constantly in the pursuit of knowledge, like you'll get better every single day.
Yes.
Let's cut this up. We're gonna go here. We'll go all the way down in one direction, then opposite all the way down in this direction, and I actually forgot to cut this one. And I'll show you. Here, watch. Just for the sake of it, my cutter won't fit over here because my machine's in the way. Whoops. What I can do is come in with my cutter here and give myself a nice straight line to come all the way down and cut. So, total option if all you have is a pizza cutter. Still make really nice tortellini.
And then what is the inch size again for
this is 1.5 inches.
1.5 inches for those who don't have the...
If you...
I just want to clarify, we're going 1.5 inches, yes.
Yes, 1.5 inches
1.5 seems really tiny.
Well, tortellini are small. And believe it or not, they make them much smaller than this. So it's crazy if you imagine how small people might make tortellini.
If you want to go a little
If you want to go a little bigger, if you want to go 2 inches, that's fine. But keep in mind, then that's like a lot of filling to dough, and they like are rather large. Then you have like a different ratio that you're working with. Just start here, and then go bigger, and see what makes sense for you.
1.5 times 1.5?
Yeah, it was squares. We want squares.
Yeah.
So 1.5 by 1.5. I didn't change the size on this anywhere. I notice it's getting a little dry because I'm working slow and I'm talking to you. So if you see me spraying this up here, that's to keep my dough hydrated so that it doesn't crack or break when I go to work with it.
Can you use the extra edges pasta trim for anything?
Yes, extra edges. If you wanted to save them, you could keep them all like in a bag so they don't dry out. As long as they're not dry, you can knead them and squeeze them back together. You could use them as noodles. You could use them as lasagna sheets. It's very hard to reuse already worked dough for filled pasta because you don't get the same elasticity and the same kind of stretch and stickiness out of them. But you could use them for a lot of other things. You could also just cook them up as little pieces in maltagliate, which means bagely cut. And then you have chef snacks. I do that often as well.
Chef snacks.
Chef snacks. All right. Little squares. All down. Tortellini filling, I don't like to put in a bag. It's a very thick filling. Instead, what I like to do is take a small bit from my bowl. I'll roll it into a tube or a log of sorts. Yes? Here, let's go close. I'll roll it into a tube or log of sorts of this. And that way I'm able to then hold it in my hand and I can slowly use my hand as like a dispenser to extract tortellini filling as I need it. So this is my dispenser hand. This is my placing hand. I'm going to come in here and just squeeze off little pieces of my filling from the top part of my hand and place it down in the center of all of my pieces of pasta. Now, how much filling you put down, you'll get a feeling for it. I would say go with just filling the center. That's probably about 30% filling to dough. But you'll see if you put too much or too little. If you just want to do a couple and leave these unfilled so you can get an idea for it, that works as well. If you need to work even slower, you need to walk away from this. Grab another zip top bag or plastic wrap.
Or reusable wrap.
Well, I don't know if that'll work as well. I know you want to use reusable wrap, but there's a reason why it works like this. And press it down over the dough so that it doesn't dry out. So like you can take this and just press it over that, and then that'll protect that half from getting too dry. Especially if you want to work slowly or teach someone how to do this. So we'll go filling, clean hands. Now we'll go another spritz just to help us manage our moisture. If you don't have a spray bottle, that's a huge tool for pasta making. Even if you only make pasta once a year, get yourself a water spray bottle. It's very, very useful, especially now there's enough moisture on this that these will stick and seal, versus if you try to dab water on here, you usually end up putting too much water. Just something to keep in mind. Now we're going to pick up our pieces. I like to form tortellini up in the air, up in my hands. I find it's easier to do up in the air or in my hands than if I try to do it on the table. And that's just me. That's the way I learn. That's the way I like to teach it. I'll come up here very close in front of the camera. We're going to go corner to corner. Keep in mind, this is a whole egg dough. There are whole eggs in here. There's protein from those whites. So a very stretchy dough. Don't be afraid to stretch the dough over that filling. And that'll get the dough thin around the back, and you'll get a very nice kind of stretch all the way around. You'll press with your fingers, creating a nice triangle. One thing to note, as you're pressing, make sure that you're pressing hard enough that one, you're sealing, but two, you're turning those two layers into one layer. Because if you remember, like we're doing here, we have two layers coming on top of each other. You don't want that double thickness. You want that single thickness. So press as hard as you can to then turn that back into one thickness layer like you have in all of these pieces. Now we have our squares. I usually do one piece. I don't do multiples at the same time. I just find it easier. We're going to come up, and I'm going to try to do this as slowly as I can. It's much harder to do slowly than once you find the rhythm for it. We're going to come in. I'm going to take my thumb. I'm going to press up in the center, and here we go. Let me find out where I am. I'm right here. I'm going to go thumb and pinch your finger, thumb and pinch your finger. I'm going to grab those two ends, and that's going to kind of help pre-shape that crown. Does that make sense? So now I have these two ends, and I have this. All still in that semi-triangle shape. Then I'm going to grab one end with my finger. I'm going to go with my thumb up and push my thumb up into the belly of that shape right there. Now you're kind of all around on your thumb, following along. We're going to do a lot of these, so don't worry if you lost yourself already. It's okay. Now we'll switch off the thumb onto your index finger. Grab the other end and pull it down around the bottom of your index finger. Grab and pinch between your index finger and your thumb, and you end up with a beautiful little rounded tortellini. Now it's very hard to do slowly. Let's do it again.
My pasta's not sticking together easily. Is it too dry?
It's too dry. You need to spritz it with a little water. If you don't have a spray bottle, you got to dab a little water around it and let it absorb the water. You can't seal it as soon as you dab water on it, or it's going to be too wet. It's going to be a swish-washy water slide. So that's bad too. Okay?
Spray, a little spray.
A little spray. That's all you need if it's not sticking. So starting again, we're going to go push up, up, up into the center. That gives you on your thumb. You should be able to balance it on your thumb. You're going to grab one end with your thumb and switch over to your other hand on your finger, right? Then you're going to grab underneath, wrap around, and press, sealing right into the nice, beautiful little ring. We'll do it again. We'll keep doing it. And mine are drying out too because we're talking, but that's okay. That's where the spray bottle comes in. We'll come up here, corner to corner, triangle. Don't be afraid to stretch the dough. The dough is made to be stretchy. That's why we're using a dough that has egg whites versus just a dough that has yolks. If you have a dough with only yolks, it's much harder to make tortellini because the dough is not going to stretch around the filling. That's just the nature of having protein versus only fat. I'll try to do this one here. No, that'd be weird. I can't do that. We're going to go up, pinch, push up in the center with your thumb, pull down. You're almost like creating this little cap, a little hat with the long. This reminds me of like one of those like elf caps, that like in wintertime you'd wear.
Or like
with
the ones long, that you wear where it snows.
Yeah. Like where elves live. They have like the long things here. Pull those down. Press up into the center. That creates that fat belly of the tortellini. Now you're going to go back over your index finger. Come around the bottom and seal the two ends. Press. And that's another press. You want to make sure you're pressing hard enough with those two fingers. Otherwise, you'll end up with a piece of pasta that doesn't cook evenly. You'll end up with a very thick, chewy piece of dough right there while everything else gets overcooked. It's important. Think about while you're pressing, you're always pressing two layers together into one. That's very important.
Someone said, love this technique. Yay.
Oh, that's good. Someone's like, I hate this technique. You're like, oh, sorry. Again, we're going to keep doing it. We're going to go end to end, press, crimp, all the way down. Same thing. When you're crimping, make sure that you're stretching the dough out, giving yourself some extra dough to work with. If you don't press hard enough and stretch the dough, it's made to be stretchy. I keep on saying the same things over and over again, but I can't stress them enough. It's all these little things that people sometimes overlook or they don't hear the first time, and then that's like the difference maker for them, okay? Pushing up into the center, wrapping it up over your thumb, holding on to this end with your right hand, coming over your left hand, wrapping down around underneath, pressing those two bottoms together, squeezing them, and you end up with a beautiful little crown of pasta.
So cute.
Questions yet?
No questions at the moment. I think
everyone's making tortellini.
Which is great. It's excellent.
Don't be afraid to stretch over the backside of your pasta. And you'll find, you could fit quite a healthy amount of dough in there. Like if you take a look, like that's a fat chunk of filling for the size of our dough piece, and you're almost like, there's no way that's gonna close. But because we used dough that had egg whites, we used the whole eggs. You're able to stretch that back end up around the dough. See how nothing tore? And you're just able to manipulate, and the dough has elasticity. That elasticity comes from gliadin. The gliadin is one of the forms of gluten. You have glutenin and gliadin. One gives you elasticity, one gives you plasticity. The elasticity is what we want. On to our next piece of dough. And what's actually really nice about making tortellini and having a dough that's, has those whites in there, it does start to dry as it sits on your counter. Dries on the surface, so then that way they're not going to stick together. They're not going to stick to your countertop. You don't need too much flour or anything at this point. Now we're just shaping and going through all of our little individual pieces of pasta. Now you can see why this is like a labor of love. Why you almost need like an army or all day to make tortellini. So now that we're all making this, let's think about that story I told you when I first learned to make these at Quince. We'd go 18 pieces per order. We do about 80 orders a night. How many pieces of tortellini is that a day?
18 per times 80. 18.
Bella's still doing math. You think she had a calculator?
1,440, chef.
1,440 pieces of tortellini every single day of pasta, and I would try my best to like try to get ahead. And every day I would like make extra or have extra. It would be like a day that we'd have like a VIP come in at like Catonia next door or something, and so we'd end up like sending over a giant bowl or platter of tortellini to the next door like restaurant that we had, our sister restaurant. And so I was like, I can never get ahead. So I learned to make a lot of these, and I learned to make them very fast. Last stretch here. Oh, you know the origin story of tortellini? It's an interesting story. What they say is the origin story of tortellini, right? Have you heard it? You've heard it.
I've heard it.
Bella doesn't like this story.
I mean, it's fine.
It's a creepy story. It's a weird story.
I don't know.
It's a weird story. They say that, like, all right, so tortellini coming from Bologna and that, like, region up Emilia-Romagna, part of Italy. They say tortellini was inspired by the Greek gods. So Zeus and Venus being a female goddess known for her beauty. The two of them were down on Earth one day. They were playing. They were running around. They were having a great time. And they got tired. You know, they were running around all day. They needed to go to get some dinner and find a place to relax and sleep before going back to Mount Olympus. Obviously, this story is made up because I don't think this happened, but this is what they say. Maybe it happened. Who knows? And so they go to the inn, and the innkeeper there who's serving Zeus and Venus is so infatuated with Venus's beauty, just blown away. The most beautiful woman, god, person he has ever seen, and is just obsessed with her. As she goes up to retire for the night to the room in the inn with Zeus, the innkeeper, like a creep he is, sneaks up to the room and peeks through the keyhole to try to get a view of Venus in her room. And all he could see through the keyhole is her navel, little belly button. He gets so inspired by her beauty and the way her navel looks. He runs down to the kitchen, and all he could think of to make are these beautiful little pastas known as tortellini that they say resembles Venus's navel. I don't know. It's weird. It's an odd story.
Goddesses don't sleep.
Oh, well, debunked. Right there. Now we know. If only someone would have said that at the beginning.
I feel like it's like the same thing as vampires. Vampires don't sleep, right?
Vampires don't sleep. Yeah, they do. They have to. That's what coffins are for.
What? I don't know if they sleep. I think they just go there.
They just go to hide from the sun.
Yeah.
Right.
All
right. So. Well, take it as you will. I don't know if there's another origin story. I do know, which makes a little more sense, the etymological, which is like the word origin of the word tortellini. The root word torta means cake. And so these are essentially little cakes or little beautiful filled packages. They're meat cakes. They're filled with beautiful pork filling. And that makes much more sense.
I think so.
Than the other version of the story. But, you know, the next time you're sitting around with friends later this year and you're like, hey, you know, we're eating tortellini. Do you know where these came from? You can tell the story too. And
decide which one
decide which one they like better and which one you like better. So let's come in one more time. We'll do this other half of our pasta here. Wiping my hands off. Quick little spray action. If you do have a mister, biggest golden rule with the mister, don't spray directly at the dough from point blank range. What ends up happening is you just put water directly in one spot. It's just like when you're dusting flour on the dough. This is exactly the same thing. You want to dust or spray from up high and let the water fall casually and gently down onto your dough. And even so, I need a little more. This is really drying out. It's okay. That's where a little more water comes from. We'll go back to folding and mixing. Other questions while I'm shaping these and going through the same process? Because sometimes just seeing it over and over helps you understand on how to do this.
Sorry if you answered this before, but what are your other favorite fillings for tortellini?
Oh, great question. So if you saw my Instagram post today, I kind of touched on this. Tortellini is one of those shapes that by design and engineering, you can only use so many types of fillings with this. Because as you see, now that you actually see this and you're not just reading it on my Instagram post, there's a lot of stretching and manipulation that happens here in the dough. We're stretching the dough up around the filling and squeezing the edges. And you want a filling that is firm. You need a filling that's thick. You need a filling that's going to hold in place and is not going to squirt out the sides when you try to shape and seal and pull and stretch your dough. So what I would not use is like a straight ricotta filling. A cheesy, creamy filling is not for tortellini. Save that for another shape. But what you could get away with is a thick, heavy filling, something like lobster, something like braised short rib, something like potatoes mixed with brown butter that have been set and are cold so that they're like nice, thick little balls of potato versus like creamy, loose, wet, room temperature potatoes. All of those things, something to consider. So, by engineering and by design will dictate what you can put in the filling, especially when it's a shape like tortellini. Agnolotti is kind of the same way. You wouldn't use a really wet filling for agnolotti. One reason being, you don't always get a perfect seal on the edges of an agnolotti. And that's okay, but as long as you have a filling that's either really thick, lots of braised vegetables, greens that have all the water cooked out of them, they're going to stay in place because they're not a liquid, wet filling. So I like other things in my tortellini filling, but by engineering of the pasta shape, you are limited on what you can put in there.
Yes.
What else? Keep hitting me.
No questions yet. But next weekend, you're going to put lobster and...
Oh, yeah. Speaking of green tortellini, everybody in the Bay Area, this announcement, I think, goes live today. So maybe you're the first to know, maybe not. I don't know if you've been on Instagram. I'm back in the kitchen for the first time in almost a year doing a guest chef dinner kit at Lazy Bear here in SF. We found a way to very safely and efficiently be a guest chef, cook a menu. And so I have my menu going on Lazy Bear's to-go dinner kit for this weekend.
Saturday?
Weekend? No, this weekend. Today's Sunday.
Right.
This weekend.
Okay.
This coming Saturday and Sunday.
There you go.
This coming Saturday and Sunday. You can find my menu on Lazy Bear's talk page. I think they go on sale tomorrow at 10 a.m. Monday at 10 a.m. And limited amounts. I think we're only doing about 50 orders each night. I imagine they're going to go fast. But we're doing lobster burrata tortellini. We're doing like a beef cheek, potato, doppio. Doing some puffed pasta nachos on there. Some fun stuff. I'm very excited. I haven't gotten to cook a menu for people in real life in a very long time. And so, this is a great opportunity to be back at the Bear Den.
Yeah, definitely. My point is one of the dishes is going to be tortellini.
A lobster tortellini.
A spin on it.
A spin on the tortellini. We're doing like a roasted lobster stock, nettle, burrata, and lobster filling. Some Benton's ham in there. If you're familiar with Benton's ham, you know. If you know, you know. Benton's ham in the tortellini filling in place of any of those Italian cured meats. And you could get those, and you don't have to do any work. You just have to be on the computer and get it before it sells out.
Someone said, I'm a pescatarian. Cooked down a ton of kale and spinach in butter, miso, and black pepper. Added some anchovy paste too. Seems to be working great.
Oh, wow. That sounds delicious.
Yeah.
I want to try that. Where do you live? I'm coming over for dinner. No, just kidding. That'd be weird. But it does sound very good. A great example of utilizing other vegetables, treating them very well, being resourceful, and making something that works well as the filling for tortellini, nice and thick, not too watery, tons of flavor packed into one little bite.
Yes.
Excellent. So I'm on my last couple of pieces here. I'm not going to roll out any more dough. I think this is plenty for us to see. We could go on moving cooking this. But if you did want to continue to roll out your dough, what you'd have is dough that is already at number 4. So all you'd have to do is take out one little piece. You'd roll it down 2 more times, 3, 2, 1. And then you're at 1 from the thinnest, and you're ready to go. And then that way you don't need to start from the scratch at the beginning every single time. And that works really well in large amounts when you're working in a restaurant. If you are like prepping a lot of pasta at once, I like to find a size that works well for my work surface area. So I'll cut each of these strips to a size that then once it's rolled out, it's exactly the length of my work surface. So that way I could do pasta all the way down and make the most of my area in each individual pass. So that's for all the cooks and chefs out there that are watching this. One little tip to be more efficient in your entire process.
Your pasta recipe is so tasty. We're making a few custard tortellini now to taste. Oh, excellent.
Love it.
Great. How long would that dough at number 4 last in the fridge?
Depending on how well you floured that, you could probably get it to tomorrow. I know it'll last till tomorrow because I will use this tomorrow. But past tomorrow, it'll start to stick together and it'll get very elastic. And you'll essentially then would have to re-roll this stack as if it's a straight regular batch of dough. And you won't be able to tear them apart. But then you can re-roll that and do the same thing over again. You'll be fine. You'll need a little more flour. The dough will be a little more elastic because it's older and it has sat around for a couple of days. But it totally works. And you can do that no problem. Does that answer the question? I think it did.
Yeah.
Great. All right, so we have our pasta ready to cook. We have our station cleaned up and organized.
One more question. Did you say that filled raw tortellini can be frozen for the future? I may have missed that earlier.
Oh, I did not say that, but I was about to. Yes, filled tortellini can be saved frozen. They actually freeze pretty well. I could dive into this whole thing, which is, my theory on whether or not you should freeze pasta in general. In theory, no, you should never freeze pasta. The reason being is because pasta has water in it. Even the water from the eggs, that's the water that I'm referring to. You don't add water, just the water that's naturally in eggs. When water freezes, it expands. We all know this. We put a water bottle in the freezer, and the water bottle explodes. So you put water that's in the pasta into the freezer. All the water on a microscopic level expands. It creates all of these little jagged shards that are going to rip up the inside of your dough on a microscopic level. Then as the dough defrosts or you cook it, the water turns back to its liquid state. All of those holes and jagged pokings inside of the dough on a microscopic level are still there. So you've essentially shredded the inside and the interior structure of your pasta dough by freezing it. If you're not concerned with texture or having it be perfect, you're not serving this to Tom and Padma to be judged on, then you can totally freeze it. If you're not like, an elitist, you're not going to know. You're not going to notice it was frozen. It's going to be totally fine. Ideally, best case scenario, you have a blast chiller in a restaurant. A blast chiller freezes things so quickly that they don't have a chance for water to expand. In which case, then, you're essentially freezing something in its most natural, perfect state. In which case, I would highly recommend freezing them if you have access to a blast chiller. If not, it's okay. You can freeze them. It works. But understanding what's happening when it freezes is part of the process.
And then how far in advance can you make the tortellini, and can you put it in the fridge, and for how long?
Great question. So because these are pretty dry, they're out, they've been sitting at room temperature, they're under a fan right now. They're to the point now where you could grab them, you could throw them into a bag. They're not going to stick together. They're totally fine, which is awesome. I could put them in the fridge, and whenever I store pasta in the fridge, there's a couple things you want to consider. Fridges are cold and they're humid. There's a lot of cold air blowing around in there. So if you're going to put it on a tray, dust the tray with semolina, take a clean kitchen towel, and drape it over the pasta. That's going to prevent condensation from forming, and it's going to protect it from cold air that's blowing on it. In which case, then you can save it for a day or two. I wouldn't save it for more than that because it's fresh pasta. Why are you making it fresh if you're not going to eat it fresh? So, in which case, it'll last that long, but then consider maybe making it closer to when you want to eat it. If you don't have a kitchen towel, you don't want to go that route. If you want it to go the best route to store it, get yourself fresh pizza boxes, unused. Dust the inside with semolina. Put your pasta in the pizza box, set that in the fridge. The box is going to protect it from the cold air, and then the lid of the box is going to absorb moisture, and the bottom of the box is going to absorb moisture because it's cardboard. And so that way your dough is not going to stick to the box. It's not going to get water condensation from the fridge on the top of the box. As if you try to put this into a Tupperware or plastic container, condensation inevitably is going to form, and it's going to make everything sticky.
And then make sure the pastas don't touch, right?
Yeah, and make sure they don't touch. But if they're partially dried out like this, you're pretty good to put it in the fridge as long as you're storing them in a way that protects them and you're being mindful of moisture management. Moisture management is key.
Can you freeze just the sheets of dough at 4?
No, you cannot freeze just the dough. I've never tried freezing just dough on its own. I don't want to say yes, but I have no experience doing that. I've never tried it. I've had no reason to try it. I imagine you cannot, just because then there's no way to keep them separate. You'd have to freeze each individual sheet on its own, and then at which point to defrost it, it would get limp and I don't know. Yeah. I would say no.
Yeah.
It's a good idea. It's a great idea, but I don't think you could do it. You could try. I don't know if it'll work. Someone got really mad at me once because I told them they couldn't do something, and they were like, well, I figured out how to do it. You said I couldn't do it that way. And I was like, all right, well, that's fine. Sorry. Like, now it's like, all right, if you want to try, like, I've just never done it that way. I've never had success with it. So when I say no, it means me. It doesn't mean you can't. You can try. You can do whatever you want. Like, come on. Do whatever you want. I'm just giving you my best advice, okay? I'm not saying, like, I'm the ultimate authority on anything, all right?
Never.
Ever, okay? Disclaimer. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to get the water.
Yes.
All right.
If anybody has any more questions, feel free to shout them out our way. I know there's a little bit of a 30-second lag on here, but I want to make sure everybody is supported and all their questions are answered.
All right, we're back.
We're back.
We're very close to the end.
I asked if anybody had any more questions.
I know. Let's wait and see what happens, huh? We'll see.
Yes.
All right. For this, I want to just shift ever so slightly over here.
Hello.
So that way you can see into our cooking station here in our close-up cam. I think it'll make things easier. We can even move this over here. So that way you can see me. Yay! Cool. All right, let's put this away. Water is just about coming to a boil. Now we can talk about salting the water, right? We need to salt our pasta water. If there's one thing you learn and take away from our time together, it's properly seasoning pasta water. We've all heard it. It's a shame it's out there in the world, but pasta water should not be as salty as the sea.
Let's all say it together.
Let's all say it together. Should not be as salty as the sea.
No.
Pasta water should not be as salty as the sea. Let me put this in perspective for you. Salt water is about 4%, seawater is about 4% salinity by volume. That's incredibly salty. If you ever lived near the ocean, if you've ever taken a trip near the beach, you probably accidentally got some salt water in your mouth. It's disgusting. It's not very good. There's no reason you would ever want to cook pasta in that. Instead, think of your pasta water as water soup. It should be seasoned like a flavorful stock. It should taste good. You should want to eat it by the spoonful and just be like, oh, this is flavorful water. It's salted. It tastes good. It's something that you want to cook in. And so that's how we need to approach seasoning our pasta water. That's about a tablespoon of water per quart. No, a tablespoon of salt per quart of water. Gives us about 1% salinity. That's a much better range for cooking pasta. All right, now that we all know that, we can say it one more time. Pasta water should not be as salty as the sea. I feel like I'm on Finding Nemo. Fish are friends, not food. Anyway. We need the rest of our tools for cooking. I like using one of these spider tools. It helps me get things out of the water much easier. I can reuse my water, and then I don't need to drain the whole pot into the sink, into a colander, but if you have a colander, that's fine. What I have here is a saute pan. This is going to be used to bring everything together. Because we are doing this in butter, or in burro, as they would say in Italian, you need a separate saute pan to create your little bit of butter sauce here. We're going to talk how to do that. I'm going to walk you through that process. And then, of course, we need our fancy butter. I'm using Kerrygold here today. This is not sponsored. I just really like Kerrygold. If you're out there, Kerrygold, and you hear this, I like you. Let's talk, all right? But I find a nice butter is really important. Don't use like the whatever butter because that's what your sauce is made of. So use something flavorful. Use something rich in butter fats and rich in dairy fats. Your palate and your guests you're cooking for will thank you.
I do have a question about the salt. Yes. I'm sorry, you said about 1 tablespoon per salt.
Per quart.
Per quart, roughly.
Roughly.
Yes.
And that's going to vary because every brand of salt has a different grain size and is going to be a different level of salinity. Like if you're using iodized salt, a tablespoon of iodized salt has a much different level of saltiness than a tablespoon of Diamond Crystal kosher salt. So take that advice with a grain of salt. Had to sneak in one more joke there. And taste your water as you season it. It's very hard to take salt out of water once you add it. I've tried. It's very hard. Instead, slowly add the salt and taste it as you go, and then that way it tastes wonderfully seasoned. Speaking of which, I need my salt. Did I already grab it?
Down there.
There it is.
On the shelf.
Here it is. Perfect. So we're going to go salt. Probably go like 2 big pinches because I've seasoned this pot of water many, many times and I know exactly how much it needs. But we can taste it. And I want to taste it just to show you it's okay to taste pasta water. For some reason people think it's weird to taste water and they don't do it. You don't need a lot. A tiny little bit is really all you need. Oh, that's nice.
What salt do you use, Chef?
I like Diamond Crystal kosher salt. For me, that's like the grain size that I'm used to. I can season with it blindfolded. I know exactly when I pinch Diamond Crystal in my fingers, I know what that's going to taste like in my palate. Like I know what a grain of that tastes like, what this tastes like, what that tastes like. If I try to switch brands and like I use Morton's or another brand of salt, I can't do that. I have to like totally guess, stop and taste it, season, and I don't know what it's going to be like before I add it. Versus using the same salt over and over allows you to build that muscle memory of what that's going to taste like when you're cooking with it. We're boiling.
Boiling.
We're moments away from boiling. I have my pot here on the side. This is going to catch my pasta as it comes out of the water. I'm like there. I'm there. We're going to go all of our little tortellinis into the water here. And now we wait. I got my pot. We're going to do our stracciatella. What is stracciatella, perhaps you say? It is a very slang, rough way of saying in Italian a phrase that means to drag through. It's the process of combining the noodle with the sauce. Did I say noodle combined with the sauce? I did. Because pasta is actually the combination of noodle plus sauce. Pasta on its own does not get sauce. Pasta is the noodle plus the sauce. Think about that for a second. Whenever you're, maybe you dine at Olive Garden, I don't know, I'm not here to judge you, but they say you choose your sauce that goes to your pasta, and that's not really correct. I don't think their chefs are trained in Italy, despite what their commercials say. You take your noodle, you pair it with the sauce, and that happy marriage of the two coming together, that is what pasta is. So that process happens here in the pan, known as stracciatella. Bringing the two together, dragging the noodle through the sauce, getting the noodle to coat with the sauce. That starchiness kind of leaches out from the dough and helps thicken and makes everything nice and creamy and delicious. And I'm just salivating talking about it. Our pasta is floating over here. The rate at which your pasta comes to float is going to depend on how powerful your stove is. A more powerful stove is going to cause pasta to float much more quickly. That's okay. That means pasta's going to cook quicker if you have a fast cooking stove. That's fine. I find that this dough and these noodles take about 4 to 5 minutes to cook is ideal. For me, personally, rolled out to this number that I know. That's why testing is okay. Before you cook all 100 of your tortellini, take a moment, cook 2 of them. Check them after about 4 minutes, taste it. Hey, do I like it or not? That way you know when you go cooking all of them, you have a better idea of how long it takes to cook that pasta for you. Some people like it extra chewy or extra dense, extra al dente. Other people don't. They want it a little more well done. Like I said, I'm not here to judge anyone. You cook your pasta how you like it. That's all right. I'm going to cook it how I like it because I'm the one that's eating it. I encourage you to do the same. Coming in here, this is why having a spider tool is really nice. You're able to grab the pasta out of the water. You don't have to, you can reuse this water if you're cooking more pasta later, or you can put in pasta in batches. And then you're able to even pull out one piece of pasta and give it a little taster test. Be careful, it's hot. It's hot, but delicious.
So good.
So good. Oh my God.
Mama Mia.
I would say Mamma Mia, but I don't know if that even does it justice.
Does floating mean they're done?
Floating does not mean they're done. Floating means that the air that is inside of the dough and inside of the pocket has gotten hot enough that it's turned to steam, and it has caused it to float to the top of the boiling water because the steam wants to go up and get out. That does not necessarily mean that it's done. A better way to tell, taste one. It should have a tiny bit of a chew. You're going to cook it about 10% more here in the pan. If you ever so wanted to, and you were unsure, you were maybe worried about overcooking them, you could pull them out early and then finish them in the butter sauce entirely, which is totally fine. Just another way of kind of looking at it. If you're worried, pull them out early, finish cooking them here until they're nice and soft and tender to the point where you want to eat them. So I only have one burner, so I would actually have this pan heating up with a little bit of this pasta water in it if I had a separate burner here, but I don't. So I'm going to pretend that this is on that burner until these come out. So you can pretend with me, if you have a separate pan and you have a separate burner, grab a little bit of this pasta water into your separate pan here on the side, and then you could grab your pasta and whatever pasta here comes with it, or whatever water comes with the pasta. There you go, that's probably more easier to understand. And we'll probably go, I'd say you want about an ounce of water down in the bottom of the pan. And I'm just grabbing the water there like that.
Can we see the close-up, please?
Yeah, let's go close up, huh? So, close up. Everybody's come out of the pan. There's about an ounce of water down here in the bottom of the pan, all pooling. We're gonna get this out of the way. We're gonna go here onto our burner. So let me go, just so you can see, perfect, there. We're gonna go there, onto our burner. Everybody heating back up. We're gonna bring this back up to high. We wanna emulsify this over high heat, and now we can slowly add our butter. Think of this as making salad dressing, making an aioli, making something that is emulsified. So if you've ever made any of those things, normally it's in a bowl. You have your liquid in the bottom, and you slowly add your fat while whisking. Obviously, we don't have a whisk, but we have our fat, and we have our bowl. So we're going to take a little bit of butter at a time here into our bowl, and we can't just leave it on its own. It's not going to emulsify. We gotta move it around, we gotta agitate it, we gotta whisk. We gotta incorporate the two together. And that's why this swirling motion, you always see chefs in restaurants cooking and doing this swirling motion. Or maybe you watch Bradley Cooper on the movie Burn. He does this swirling motion. I'm not saying I'm like Bradley Cooper, I'm saying he's like me. Okay, what you need to do is swirl and emulsify everything together, otherwise your sauce is going to break. Now, breaking sauces, that's when your emulsification separates. The fat is no longer suspended within the water. It's like when you accidentally add oil too fast to your aioli or your salad dressing. Same sort of thing here. If you just leave this alone and you stop swirling, the heat's going to separate your sauce, and it's going to be very hard to bring back together. So stay with your pan, don't leave it, continue to swirl, and as that water evaporates, the butter is going to concentrate, it's going to thicken and glaze all of your pieces of pasta. And if you want it a little thicker or you want it a little richer, you could add another knob of butter. And if you notice maybe it gets too thick, too buttery, or it looks like it's separated, that's when you'll grab a spoonful of pasta water and add that. And sometimes it's like, it's practice. It's nothing you could kind of read a cookbook on, how to properly make this butter sauce. It's much more like you get an eye for it. You see what the pan looks like as it's coming together. You look at it and you see it's emulsified. You see it's coming together. You see it's not separated. It doesn't look glossy. It's nice and creamy. It smells delicious. You smell the butter. That's why using a good butter, I think, is important here. And we're not leaving it alone. We're swirling. We're twirling. We're using unsalted butter here too, by the way, because I want to control my salt content. If I was using salted butter, I'd be limited on how much butter I can add. Or I'm using unsalted butter, I can put an unlimited amount of butter in here, and it's going to not be salty. Give it a little taste. Make sure you like how salty it is. Speaking of which, we are nice and glazed here now. We can almost drag through the center of the pan and it stays separated. Everything is glazed, all of our pieces of pasta. If you find yourself at the point where this has boiled down and reduced too much, it has separated, and you have this like gross looking pool of like oil and water, and it is not coating your pasta anymore and everything looks greasy, that's okay. What you want to do is grab a tiny bit of your pasta water, like a tiny bit, all you need is the tip of a spoonful, And we're going to re-swirl this back over the heat. And sometimes you need higher heat or you need a tiny bit more water. But with that tiny bit of water and a little bit more heat, you're able to re-emulsify that butter and bring it all back together. So that way, everything is nice and glazed. It's nice and rich and creamy. And you don't have that like weird looking broken sauce. We have this nice, beautiful, yellow, creamy butter sauce. Now you're allowed to say Mamma Mia. Okay? We'll bring our bowl over. We're gonna go right here in the center. We'll spoon everybody down into the bowl. And if you saved yourself some parm, pat yourself on the back. Sprinkling a parm on here would be absolutely divine. And like I said, if you want to cook this in chicken stock and enjoy this in chicken stock, 1000% do that. That is the way you probably get it in Bologna. You probably won't see it in butter like this unless it's white truffle season and you're going to shave truffles all over the top. Which is another demo for another day. Nice bit of butter sauce. One thing to note here, you know your sauce is in a good place when you don't see it pool all the way down the bottom of the bowl. It is coating all of the noodles. There's a little bit of butter kind of like pooling off of everybody, but it's nice and glazed. Things are like gripping onto the sauce. It's gripping onto the noodles. They're not swimming in a pool there, and this is exactly where you want to be. This is a good stracciatella where everything has kind of come together as one, and we have pasta, not noodles plus sauce.
2 questions. Sorry, but can you repeat how much butter and pasta water goes into the sauce?
So it varies depending on how much. It's going to vary slightly depending on how much pasta you're cooking. So like I used about 2 tablespoons, maybe 3 tablespoons of butter to bring this together for this here, and maybe 2 ounces of pasta water. But the pasta water is going to vary because it evaporates, it disappears. It becomes one with this. So you could keep adding pasta water and cooking it over high heat, and you could keep adding an unlimited amount of water and just keep tallying it up and be like, oh yeah, I added 8 cups of pasta water, and it just kept reducing down and turning into this. So focus more on just building yourself a nice glaze that coats all of your noodles, much more so than like I need exactly this and exactly this, because it's going to vary depending on how hot your stove is, the size of pan you have.
It's more the technique.
It's the technique of bringing the butter and the sauce together as one to coat your noodles.
And the eye behind it.
So I used about 2 ounces of water and about 3 or 4 tablespoons of butter to answer your question.
Is there a butter alternative I can emulsify? Would a vegan butter like Nyokos be better, or olive oil?
I would use Nyokos. Olive oil sauces are very hard to emulsify, especially with a filled pasta like this. What ends up happening is that it just breaks and you end up having olive oil and pasta water all over the place, and it's not that enjoyable. I'm fairly certain Nyokos is heat stable to the point where you can, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought, where you could heat it up and it'll just get nice and creamy. I would just add it right at the last second. So I would like boiling pasta water, about an ounce, add your tablespoon or 2 of Nyokos, swirl it all together till it melts and kind of coats everything, and then plate it right away. I don't know if it's stable enough to like boil, but it's definitely stable enough to at least get creamy and melty and cover everything in your bowl. Although eggs are not vegan. Did you say vegan? You're eating eggs.
No, dairy alternative.
Dairy alternative, sorry.
Yeah. Like a butter alternative.
Butter alternative. Yeah, Nyokos would be great.
Yeah. How long can the pasta sheets stay covered to roll out more tortellini?
So these in the bag can stay covered like this all day. Like you make these later tonight. If you put this back in the fridge, you can make these tomorrow. Just let them come to room temperature again before you use them. That's very important. After tomorrow, they start to stick together. They start to oxidize, and it starts to get like, use your best judgment on that. But you could definitely get tomorrow out of them for sure.
And then no questions so far.
All right, I'm going to take a bite. You all let me know if there are any more questions, but I need to eat this immediately. So we're going to jump in, get all that butter. Oh my God. Here we go.
Happiness. Pure happiness.
Pure happiness. You eat that, and it's almost like, like I feel like light just kind of shining down, washing me over from Bologna. I don't know, maybe it was Venus. Who knows? I don't know. That's my favorite way to eat tortellini. That filling takes me right back to Bologna. Mortadella, prosciutto, all that parm. I think it's really important to get tons of parm in there. It really takes this filling like to where it needs to be. Makes it really robust and intense and all these little tiny pieces of pasta. And then the butter. Chicken broth is great. It's a good way to eat tortellini, but for me, more butter, more better. Questions?
This was awesome and so much fun. Can't wait to do it again. Thanks for the lessons and dinner. Yay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
To everyone out there. I appreciate all of you. As always, I couldn't do what I do without you. So thank you for joining me, for supporting me, for giving me the opportunity to do this. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much. If there's anything I can do for you, answer questions, send me a DM on Instagram, send me an email, use the taco emoji. That way I know that we've spent the afternoon together. It's like our little inside secret. And then that way we're like best friends on Instagram. I see the taco emoji. I'm like, oh, this person, they're pasta people. They're in the club. Whatever they need, I got them. I'm there for you. And, you're there for me. I hope you enjoy this. Don't forget to tag me. I want to see everybody's tortellini adventures today.
Yeah.
Put it on the gram. And in the future, I'm looking at a focaccia pizza class for February. So if you're into that kind of thing, stay tuned. I'm excited for that. If there's nothing else, from the bottom of our hearts to yours, everybody stay safe out there. Peace, love, and pasta.
Yes, and again, reminder, if you're in the Bay Area,
Lazy Bear dinner kits.
Lazy Bear dinner kits next
Get 'em tomorrow.
weekend. Or you're also doing a Friday focaccia drop.
Oh yeah, I'll be cooking lunch at Lazy Bear on Friday too. Surprise. Surprise! Found out here first. Thank you, Bella. Otherwise, if that's not it, I will let everyone go on their own adventures. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Yay.